Chapter 34. The sound of the ground cracking could be heard again. Roddy cursed and immediately dodged to the side. Instantly, he felt another tree behind him shatter into pieces. He quickly hid under the giant tree that was originally used to deal with the Ricks. As he listened to the rapidly spinning sawdust piercing deep into the tree trunk, he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. There was no other way. Since this mutated giant scorpion had entered the battle, there was no way for him to escape. He could only win this battle. If he lost, he would die. But as for a countermeasure, Roddy's chaotic mind could not come up with one at all. In the end, he decided to try the old method. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the giant tree that was used by countless players to fly kites. He was prepared to attract the Scorpion King's attention. But just as he revealed his head, he saw a rapidly enlarging black shadow. Boom! If Roddy had not dodged in time, half of his body would have been smashed into minced meat. This unknown Scorpion King destroyed 1/3 of the tree trunk with one blow. Roddy could only feel a large number of insects and leaves falling from the top of his head. His heart instantly felt cold. Running far away, Roddy already understood that trees of this thickness could not stop the Scorpion King. Left with no choice, he found the thickest giant tree in the forest and waited for the Scorpion King to come over. Before he could catch his breath, he realized that the Scorpion King suddenly stopped in its tracks. It suddenly began to hit the ground with its two large pincers, and at the same time, it let out an ear-piercing hissing sound. This is the second phase of summoning? Rustling sounds could be heard, and countless flickering shadows appeared in the dark forest. These small fluorescent scorpions that were summoned by the Scorpion King should only appear when its HP dropped to 70%. Who knew that before Roddy could even touch them, they had already swarmed over in large numbers? When Roddy thought of Sally, who was not far away, he did not know how to deal with her. He anxiously shouted towards the darkness, "Run! Run! Run as far as you can!" As soon as he finished speaking, Roddy felt the giant tree he was leaning against suddenly tremble. Countless broken pieces flew past his face. Roddy realized that the Scorpion King's pincers were deeply embedded in the originally hard tree trunk. The fur on the pincers were less than 10 centimeters away from his eyes. Everything had gone beyond his imagination. It was completely different from what he had expected. According to the original plan, Roddy was supposed to bring the Scorpion King to the trap. After the Scorpion King was lured by the fishy smell, he would use the hanging stones to smash the Scorpion King's head to reduce its HP. When the Scorpion King was stunned, he would rely on the poisoned arrows to cause continuous damage. Finally, he would use the giant tree spear to deal a fatal blow. But now, it seemed that the violent giant scorpion in front of him did not fall for this trick at all. Roddy could feel that its strength was so great that it could ignore most of the obstacles in the trees. Its giant pincers could easily break a large tree with a single swing. The thickness of its carapace was also beyond imagination. When a fallen giant tree hit it, it did not seem to have any effect at all. Although Roddy maintained a calm expression on his face, he actually felt a huge pressure in his heart. At this moment, Sally's scream from afar made his heart sink. If Sally died in the hands of those scorpions, it could be said that all his previous efforts would be in vain. Thinking of this, Roddy simply made up his mind. Looking at the trap that was only a few dozen meters away, he broke into a run. Don't worry about whether it would work or not, just try it first. In the distance, Sally, who was placed behind the giant tree by Roddy, had definitely experienced the most terrifying scene in her life. She never thought that there would suddenly be so many fluorescent scorpions under the ground, and each of them was extremely huge. Even with Roddy's warning, Sally was still scared and screamed. She was forced to retreat by the densely packed scorpions in front of her until her back was against the tree. Only then did she realize that she had actually attracted all the scorpions that had appeared. Sally certainly did not know that there was a skill in the game called group taunt, but it was obvious that her current behavior had simply explained the essence of this skill. Looking at the hundreds of scorpions that had already surged towards her, Sally clenched the dagger that Roddy gave her. For a moment, both of her legs were actually weak and she could not move. She looked in the direction of Roddy in the distance as if asking for help, but she heard that his voice was full of determination. Run! When Sally heard the other person's indistinct voice, she then remembered that she could not rely on anyone at this moment. Strength seemed to have returned to her body. The usually calm and quick-witted girl at this moment finally regained control of her body. She took a deep breath and looked at the countless scorpions that had yet to close up the encirclement in front of her. She suddenly ran out. Go around the tree stump. Go around the tree stump. Silently reciting the method that Roddy taught her, Sally's small face tensed up as she shuttled through the forest. Her running speed was far slower than Roddy's, but it was still slightly faster than these short-legged scorpions that were not good at running. The cold wind blew past her face. Sally frowned and tried hard to identify the direction in front of her. She calmly began to hide around the thick tree trunks. Logically speaking, as long as these scorpions rushed up and surrounded her, there would be no way for Sally to escape. However, the actual situation was a little unbelievable to Sally. When Sally's figure disappeared behind the tree trunk, the rapidly crawling scorpions were collectively stunned for a moment. After that, only a small portion of them continued to move towards the tree trunk where Sally was hiding. The rest of them slowed down and squeezed behind as if they were queuing up. 4 players, this was just a way to deal with the scorpions using the system settings. It could not even be considered a bug. However, for Sally, it meant that she could use the method that Roddy told her to save her life. The shock in Sally's heart was gradually replaced by a strange feeling. As she ran, she could not help but think of another question. What was Roddy doing now? Was there an accident? Before she had the time to look into the distance, the Scorpion King's painful roar came from the forest. The glowing scorpion on the ground suddenly paused. Then, as if it was suddenly stimulated, it instantly sped up. This made Sally, who was already panting, extremely nervous. She also sped up her escape. In the distance, Roddy had just cut off the second vine that was tied to the rock, and the huge rock smashed onto the scorpion's head. Bang! The Scorpion King's head was smashed. Broken rocks flew everywhere, but it did not move at all. Roddy was also quite surprised. He did not expect that the fish he threw into the trap would have such a miraculous effect. After smelling the fish, the Scorpion King completely gave up on Roddy. It waved its giant claws and searched for the smelly fish that Roddy threw into the trap. It actually had no intention of continuing the chase. What is this? Chaotic hatred? Bug. Facing this unfamiliar Scorpion King boss, Roddy was puzzled. He immediately seized the opportunity to smash the huge rock on the Scorpion King's body. The Scorpion King's roar immediately gave him a chance to win this battle. When the third rock hit the Scorpion King's head, blood splattered and a dent appeared on the carapace of the Scorpion King's head. Even so, the Scorpion King still did not shift its attention to Roddy. Its huge body crawled in the forest. Even if it fell into Roddy's trap, it could escape from the deep pit in 2 seconds. It seemed that the reason it was so crazy was just to swallow the raw bait one by one. At the side, Roddy took advantage of the situation and smashed 5 huge rocks on the Scorpion King's head. This battle, which was full of surprises, fell into a strange atmosphere. Roddy could see the instant's dungeon boss's HP through the interface. At this moment, the Scorpion King's HP had already been reduced by 50%. However, this situation made him even more nervous. He did not have an unlimited number of rocks in his hands. With a total of 7 rocks and a wooden spear, Roddy was still not confident that he could kill the Scorpion King. The strange behavior of the Scorpion King was completely unreasonable. Even if it was the plan to deal with the Rix, it was not to watch the Scorpion King foolishly jump into the trap and get smashed to death. The The strangeness of the situation made Roddy feel extremely uneasy. However, he did not dare to stop his actions. When the Scorpion King ate the seventh fish thrown into the trap, the last huge rock was blocked by the Scorpion King's pincers. Bang! The sound of hard bone and rock colliding resounded through the forest, causing Roddy to freeze on the spot. He definitely did not expect the Scorpion King to be smart enough to block such an attack. If it was the Thyryx of the past, these 7 rocks would have been enough to smash the Scorpion King to death. At that time, he would only need to use the wooden spear to determine the outcome of the battle. But now, the Scorpion King's movement speed was still extremely fast, and it even had more than 40% of its HP left. It looked like Roddy had the upper hand, but in reality, if he took a wrong step, he would immediately be consigned to eternal damnation. After the Scorpion King ate the last fish, it immediately turned its attention to Roddy. This time, with only the horn bow left in his hand, he was still more than 20 meters away from the Scorpion King. However, Roddy, who had already tried to attack before, knew that he could not break through the Scorpion King's carapace defense. Hence, he ran towards the tree that had previously blocked the Scorpion King, hoping to find the Scorpion King's weakness while he was circling the tree. However, he didn't expect to see Sally, who had circled around a tree and was running towards him, not long after he started running. This was definitely a blunder that no one wanted to see happen. Both of their legs were already a little stiff from running, and they could only watch as the Scorpion King became bigger and bigger in their vision. Then, they collided with each other. Roddy instinctively stretched out his arms and grabbed her as she fell to the ground. At the same time, he used the momentum to roll away. His weight and speed were much greater than Sally's. That was why after the collision, Sally was completely carried away by him. When she recovered from the dizziness, Sally had already run with all her might to the point where she could not even speak. Row. Roddy, Sally wanted to say something, but when she clearly saw the Scorpion King behind Roddy, the little girl who had never seen such a terrifying creature opened her mouth silently and was completely stunned on the spot. Roddy did not need to look back to know that the Scorpion King had entered his attack range. In a moment of desperation, he half knelt and grabbed Sally's body with both hands. "Get up!" With a roar, Roddy seemed to have unleashed all the potential of the human body, and threw Sally 4 to 5 meters away like a sack. He did not even know why he did it, and his mind was filled with instinctive thoughts. Perhaps it was because his heart had never been cruel to the point where he regarded human life as worthless. At this time, his action was completely to get Sally away from the danger behind him. In Sally's vision, in the spinning world, Roddy's shadow was getting further away from her. She stretched out her hand, trying to grab him. However, under the dim light, a huge pincer suddenly appeared on Roddy's back. No! Chapter 35. The Scorpion King's pincers hit Roddy's back. His body flew out like a kite with a broken string. Over 10 meters away, his body did not even show any signs of falling. He only stopped after crashing into and breaking 2 small trees. Sally watched the scene unfold in front of her. The muffled sound was like a heavy hammer hitting her chest, making it hard for her to breathe. She wanted to call out Roddy's name, but she found that she couldn't say anything with her mouth open. There was a moment of silence in the forest. The Scorpion King, whose head was full of dents and blood, stared at the place where Roddy disappeared. It didn't seem to notice Sally, who was not far away. Sally, who was holding a dagger in her hand, looked at the Scorpion King, whose body was more than 10 times bigger than her, and slowly stood up. At this time, in Sally's mind, there were no emotions such as anger, regret, or fear. It was as if the scene of Roddy's body flying out was permanently engraved in her mind, and it kept repeating and replaying in front of her eyes. After the stimulation of the senses, the emotions that followed began to slowly but firmly invade the consciousness. The chill in her heart spread, and Sally couldn't help but stagger a step. But very quickly, She bit her lips fiercely and suppressed her feelings of despair. She turned around and ran towards the forest in the distance as if she had gone mad. She knew that she couldn't die here. If she could escape, if she could leave this place, she would definitely call all the troops of her family to kill all these damned scorpions, even if she had to pay any price. At this moment, Sally had completely forgotten about the messy family affairs within her family. When she thought that Roddy might be seriously injured and die, Sally felt a suffocating feeling spread in her chest. The Scorpion King sensed Sally and hesitated for a moment. It seemed to be considering whether it should eat Roddy or chase after Sally. The moment of hesitation allowed Sally to escape from its attack range. 2 seconds later, the gigantic Scorpion King seemed to have finally made up its mind. It moved its furry limbs and chased after Sally in the dark, ignoring Roddy, whose fate was unknown. Up to this point, it looked like they had basically fallen into a losing situation. When he recovered from the dizziness, Roddy, who was lying on the ground, opened his mouth and tried to breathe, but he only felt that his throat was blocked by something. He coughed, and blood spurted out of his mouth, splattering all over the ground. The sharp pain in his chest made him open his mouth silently, and it took him almost 3 to 4 seconds to regain his senses. His body didn't listen to him because his spine seemed to have been directly broken. As for the specific number of broken bones, it didn't seem to be important anymore. His ribs pierced through his lungs, and the burning pain spread from his chest. He coughed again from the pain. Attributes. Panel. Roddy understood that he had fallen into a state of near death. He looked helplessly at his HP of 4/150, and his heart was cold. In the end, because of his carelessness, he lost everything. Although the HP on the panel was not empty, Roddy knew that if he didn't receive timely treatment, his HP would slowly drop to 0. Sure enough, he was overconfident. It was not appropriate to use the experience he had gained 2 years later in the present. It was too late for regrets. Roddy didn't even know what last words he should leave. He just hoped that Sally could finally escape the Scorpion King's pursuit and survive. The floating number panel in front of him was a little blurry. Roddy looked at the starry sky above his head, which was slightly covered by the trees. Many inexplicable emotions welled up in his heart. It was the first time in his life that he thought about what last words should be. But in the end, the only thing that came to his mind was the figure that he always wanted to see after his rebirth, but never had the chance to. The pain in Roddy's chest made his expression a little twisted. He looked at the experience pane beside him, and the reminder that he needed 32 points to light up the level up button was so glaring. His vision began to blur. This completely real feeling of impending death made Roddy forget the pain in his body, and he fell into an inexplicable silence. I didn't expect to die so soon after my rebirth. Just as he was about to close his eyes and wait for the moment of death to come, the number in the experience pane suddenly changed. What happened to the original change? Roddy felt that he had lost his sense of hearing, but he instinctively thought of Sally, who was running in the distance. Could it be because of her? His HP was about to drop to 0. Roddy's eyes widened as he felt a sudden spark of hope. In another 5 seconds, he would become an ice-cold corpse with 0 HP. However, before that happened, would he be able to reverse the situation because of Sally? Go to hell. Sally endured the pain of the wound on her calf, raised her foot and stomped down hard. Then, she used the dagger in her hand to nail a fluorescent scorpion the size of a child to the ground. Because she was avoiding the Scorpion King, she was far less experienced than Roddy, so she ran straight into the range of the scorpions. But in order to escape, she did not care about the poisonous stingers that Roddy had warned her about, and ran straight over them. The scorpion's tail bit her calf as expected, and the feeling of pain and numbness hit her. But along the way, Sally also trampled many small poisonous scorpions to death. She no longer cared about the burning pain and the slight dizziness caused by the poison. After bypassing a big tree, Sally used a very decisive and courageous way to kill the scorpion that was following her. She wanted to continue running, but her legs gave way, and she uncontrollably sat on the ground. Because of the poison, Sally gradually lost control of the muscles in her body. Then, the Scorpion King's attack came from behind. It lifted its pincers and slashed the tree above Sally's head. Wood chips flew everywhere, and Sally was thrown to the ground by the shock and impact. But because of that, she managed to escape. The flying tree trunks did not hit her delicate body. But when the Scorpion King locked its eyes on her, it was obvious that Sally could not escape its next attack. The gigantic body almost covered everything in front of it. When it raised its pincers, the entire sky seemed to be covered, and the fishy smell coming from its mouth sounded as if it was mocking. Sally looked at all of this in despair. The only thing she could think of was not her cold father or her hypocritical brother, but the guy she had called an idiot just a few minutes ago. In the end, she still couldn't escape. She could not say the sigh in her heart, because she knew that no one could hear it. But strangely, there was not much regret or anger in her heart. It seemed that the moment she saw Roddy being hit, she was mentally prepared for this moment. If he died, no one would care about me anymore, right? In the darkness, the cold pincers were raised to the top, but when they were about to fall down with great force, the Scorpion King's huge body seemed to tremble nervously. Time seemed to freeze at this moment, and its whole body suddenly stiffened. Then, the Scorpion King's limbs began to twitch, and its two big pincers began to swing wildly, as if it had lost control. Even Sally could hear the unconcealable pain in its hissing. What's going on? Sally tried her best to crawl away, but when she turned around, she saw that the Scorpion King had already given up on attacking. Its limbs twitched as it tried to turn around, but it could not move as nimbly as before because of the pain. When its body swayed, the vague figure behind it was revealed. Sally's eyes suddenly widened, and she involuntarily covered her mouth. Roddy was still alive. His mouth and clothes were covered with a large patch of blood, and it looked very scary. But at this moment, his movements were almost crazy. The scimitar in his hand stabbed straight into the reproductive cavity below the Scorpion King's hind limbs, and not only that, the scimitar forcefully twisted 5 or 6 times. The reproductive cavity was the most vulnerable part of a scorpion's body. Although players knew this, not many could really attack this place, because the Scorpion King was always protecting this weak point. At this moment, Roddy seized this fleeting opportunity to break through the Scorpion King's defense, inflicting heavy damage on it. Just as his HP was about to reach 0, Roddy's EXP met the requirements to level up. This level up HP recovery bug allowed him to instantly heal all the wounds on his body and resurrect with full HP. This could not be called a miracle, but it allowed him to directly disappear from the Scorpion King's aggro list, and then he was able to deliver that extremely sinister slash without the Scorpion King noticing. But this was not enough to end the Scorpion King's life. Seeing that the Scorpion King's HP had dropped to 20%, it immediately turned around and ran towards the wooden spear trap dozens of meters away. The furious Scorpion King immediately left the stunned Sally behind, and turned around to chase after it. Unexpectedly, Roddy suddenly stopped, turned around, and slashed at an inconspicuous vine in the dark. The Scorpion King seemed to have sensed that something was wrong, and immediately tried to stop its forward momentum with all its might. But because it had rushed too hard, its body was still rushing forward uncontrollably. The wooden spear suddenly fell. Poof! Maybe it was because Roddy had too much bad luck before, but at this moment, the wooden spear accurately pierced into the gap in the center of the Scorpion King's carapace, and actually pierced through the Scorpion King's body. Blood mixed with internal organs splattered on the ground. The 6-meter-long Scorpion King completely lost the ability to move because of this attack. Its huge scorpion tail swung wildly, but it could only hiss and spin in circles, unable to move. Roddy picked up the horn bow and quiver that he had thrown away when he was smashed into the ground, and strode forward. When he was 10 meters away from the Scorpion King, he knocked an arrow on the bow and started shooting without saying a word. Chapter 36. Earthbreaker's biggest feature was the realism of living creatures. No matter how high the level of a creature was, even if it was a giant dragon, as long as you had the opportunity to hit a vital point and the attack was strong enough, you could still cause considerable or even massive damage. So, after the 10th poisoned arrowhead pierced the Scorpion King's eye socket and caused a splash of blood, the huge Scorpion King no longer made a sound. The Scorpion King was dead, but Roddy did not feel relieved at all. He bypassed the Scorpion King and sprinted towards Sally. The fluorescent scorpions in the distance had already dispersed due to the Scorpion King's death. Fortunately, that was the case. Otherwise, what Roddy would see would be the scene of Sally being drowned by countless scorpions. But the current situation was not optimistic at all. Sally had been stung by the poisonous scorpions a few times and her life was in danger at any time. If it was in the past, these scorpion venoms would not be surprising at all, because the players would definitely carry antidotes. But now, even alchemists were a scarce resource in the territory, let alone antidote. Where would they find the antidote materials? Damn it! When Roddy saw Sally's appearance, he still felt as if he had come too late. He picked up the unconscious girl and got up to confirm the direction. He did not care about the dead Scorpion King at all, and carried her as he ran madly towards Stello Creek. To deal with scorpion venom, other than using antidotes, the other method that the players had developed was to soak the whole body in water to wake the victim up from the illusion. As for the poison, Roddy could only hope that Sally's HP could survive this. Because it took a lot of time to prepare the trap, the day after killing the Scorpion King was already dimly lit. Roddy effortlessly found the source of Stello Creek, a small pool with a slightly elevated terrain. Without saying a word, he jumped into the cold water with Sally in his arms. The temperature of the cool spring water was extremely low, causing him to shiver uncontrollably. However, he still continued to walk towards the deep end. In the end, only Sally's face was exposed to the surface of the water. Roddy, who was frozen stiff, hugged the girl's delicate body tightly in his arms, trying his best to support her body to float in the water, anxiously waiting for her to recover from the illusion. If she couldn't recover, then there was only one possibility. The damage caused by the poison was too much for her to bear, and she would die from losing all her HP. This was the place where the Scorpion King, Thyrix, had polluted the water source. Roddy was very familiar with the terrain. The final mission given to the players by the Wood Elf village was to kill Thyrix and hand over the poison gland in his stinger to the village chief in exchange for a reward. However, all of this happened 2 years later. 2 years ago today, would the Wood Elves still need the players' help to kill the Scorpion King? Roddy was considering whether he could go to the Wood Elf village to seek help. He understood the Wood Elf language, but the conservative Wood Elves probably wouldn't easily accept the appearance of humans. Even after the Wood Elf village gradually opened up due to the influx of players 2 years later, there were still many Wood Elves who disregarded or even viewed humans with hostility. However, at this time, only the Wood Elves probably had the ingredients to make antidote. Thinking of this, Roddy was burning with anxiety. He lowered his head to check on Sally's injuries, but he didn't expect to see a pair of bright and round eyes. Sally didn't know how she woke up. She only knew that she was running helplessly in a dreamlike illusion until the world suddenly collapsed in the bone-chilling cold. What appeared in front of her was Roddy's anxious face with his brows tightly furrowed. At this moment, Sally felt confused. She seemed to have forgotten what she had just experienced, and even forgot who the man in front of her was. However, when the memories came flooding back, her gaze changed from confusion to uncontrollable fear. When Roddy's face became clear in her eyes, Sally finally came back to her senses, But then she did something that even she couldn't imagine. She stretched out her arms and almost instinctively hugged Roddy tightly. Sally didn't know why she was so excited after confirming that Roddy was still alive. Although Sally had learned to handle things calmly since she was young, she obviously couldn't control her emotions at this moment. The two young people who had only met each other for less than a week were quietly hugging each other in the ice-cold pool. They seemed to have forgotten about the dangerous jungle environment around them, and even more so about the thrilling experience of killing the Scorpion King together. Roddy felt as if Sally was trying to squeeze all the air out of his chest. It was as if the one strangling him was not a human but an octopus. However, this obviously wasn't the reason why he was still in a daze. Speaking of which, Roddy's heart at this moment was far more shocked than Sally's. In his impression, an ordinary level 8 player wouldn't be able to resist more than 4 attacks from the Scorpion King, let alone a petite and weak girl like Sally. Moreover, the Scorpion King's poison not only created illusions, but also had a strong paralyzing effect. For humans, unless they used antidotes, even a level 10 player would be paralyzed for half a day. But now, not only was Sally not paralyzed and unconscious, she was also conscious and her eyes were clear. Her hands tightly strangled Roddy, as if she had never been injured. After remaining silent for 10 seconds, Roddy finally came back to his senses. He hurriedly carried Sally out of the stream and sat on the dry grass beside the pool, his whole body drenched. After sneezing a few times, he didn't even have time to take off his jacket. He moved closer to Sally's legs and carefully examined the wounds. At this moment, he couldn't care about etiquette at all because the Scorpion King's poison had mysteriously lost its effect. It was really something he couldn't understand. Sally's small legs were slender and weak. Because she didn't have any protection when she passed through the forest, there were many scratches and stab wounds. But at this moment, the most conspicuous ones were the red and swollen marks from the Scorpion King's bite. Roddy counted and his heart thumped, because there were a total of 12 stab wounds. Roddy swallowed his saliva. He was very clear that, according to common sense, Sally should be dead by now. Character information. Without thinking too much, Roddy said such an unimaginable sentence in front of Sally. Then he looked at the data that appeared on top of Sally's head and frowned even more, because it showed that she still had more than 60% HP left. Is it poison purification? Or poison immunity? That's not right. Roddy sat in the same place gloomily. His tone was filled with undisguised surprise. But when he looked up and wanted to say something to Sally, the words were suddenly stuck in his throat. Because her clothes were completely wet, the linen dress was completely stuck to Sally's body, completely revealing the outline of her body in front of Roddy. Although Roddy was an otaku who had a painful relationship experience, it didn't mean that he didn't understand the beauty of a woman's body. At this moment, a young and beautiful girl was sitting in front of him in a wet state. If Roddy said that he didn't have any reaction, it would be a lie. Awkward, at a loss. Sally also noticed this, but she got out of the awkward situation faster than Roddy and said, I don't feel like there's anything wrong with me. Can I start a fire to dry my clothes now? Roddy's eyes moved away, no longer daring to stay on Sally's body. He trembled as he got up, lowered his head and replied, Wait here, I'll go get some firewood. He turned around and walked a few steps, then suddenly stopped and said with his back facing Sally, It's best to take off your clothes. If you keep wearing them, you'll get sick. Sally's face instantly turned red. She originally wanted to ignore Roddy's opinion, but after a cold wind blew in the morning, Sally couldn't help but sneeze. Thinking of Roddy's attitude towards her, Sally trembled and stretched out her hand. Roddy, who had walked 100 meters away, wasn't worried that there would be any monsters attacking Sally. According to the procedure, this was already a safe area after clearing the dungeon. But thinking of the previous incident, he didn't dare to go too far for fear of accidents. He trotted back to pick up all the equipment, cut off the tail of the giant scorpion king, and carefully put away the poison gland. He picked up the animal skin and food that he had thrown away before finally dragging a large pile of things back to Sally. Sally was almost naked at this time, only wearing a skirt as a shawl. Roddy tilted his head and awkwardly placed the leopard skin in front of her, then turned his head and silently started a fire. After experiencing several life and death situations, Sally's attitude towards Roddy had changed a lot. She blushed and wrapped her body with the animal skin, but she felt that when facing Roddy, she still didn't have much resistance and bashfulness in her heart. The chaotic emotions brought about by the battle just now gradually calmed down. After a moment of silence, she said, "I never thought that I would have such a day. In the past, I read that there were people living in the forest. Now Are we similar to them? Well, that's far from it." Roddy lit the bonfire and blew away the rising smoke. He propped up Sally's linen skirt with a tree branch and placed it next to the fire. He tried to calm down and replied, "Living in the forest? How should I put it? Those fellows aren't as primitive as you think. For example, the wood elves. From a certain point of view, they actually live a better life than Norland Village. And their brewing technology is something that we can never reach." Roddy didn't have the concept of being reserved in his mind. He only knew that if he didn't dry his clothes, the wind would probably pierce through his heart. So, he also took off his coat with shivering hands and placed it in front of the bonfire to dry. It was hard to change the habit of being a lone wolf. Although there was a member of the opposite sex by his side, Roddy wouldn't let himself catch a cold and sneeze for a week because of some pride. Chapter 37. As if to resolve the discomfort and awkwardness caused by taking off their clothes, the usually silent duo became more talkative as they tried to find a suitable topic. Speaking of which, I miscalculated today. I didn't expect it to be so different from what I imagined. I almost lost my life. I'm really sorry. This kind of apology is really strange. I don't think there's anything to be sorry about not being able to defeat this guy. Sally turned around and looked at the Scorpion King's corpse. There were more than 10 arrows in its eye sockets, as if there were a bunch of antennas in its head. It looked a little funny. Will we meet more like this later? No, this is the only one. But it's really a troublesome guy. I almost died. At first, it was a sigh of relief, but gradually, Sally changed the topic and said, "Previously when you said you were smarter than me, I thought it was just an act. But now, it seems that I have to admit it. I'm just experienced. To put it bluntly, if you didn't turn around and run when I was hit, I guess both of us would have died here." Roddy also exhaled, feeling a little guilty and annoyed. "I neglected some problems, causing you to be stung by the scorpion so many times. Oh yes. I've always wanted to know, why are you fine after being hit? The last time we faced the orcs, it seemed to be like this. I clearly saw that orc slashed you in the back. Could it be that you—" In fact, Sally had been thinking about these things since she was sitting here, and now she finally found the right time to bring it up. She stared at Roddy without blinking, frowned slightly, and asked in a low voice with some disbelief, "Could it be that you're an undead? You're immortal?" Achoo! Roddy sneezed and rubbed his nose. He suddenly felt that the girl beside him was really a little cute. He didn't know how to explain, but now he felt that this reason was not bad. He jokingly replied, "Sigh, I didn't expect that you would still be able to see through me." There was a moment of silence. Sally stared at Roddy's face in a daze, and her expression suddenly became very interesting. In the next second, a scream resounded through the forest. Sally wanted to retreat as if she was electrocuted, but her legs gave way and she directly fell backward, almost somersaulting. She really believed Roddy's words. After all, this girl had never seen what a real undead looked like. In addition, Roddy had mentioned about the undead before. In her mind, she suddenly combined the two together and actually really thought that Roddy was one of the legendary undead that walked in the graveyard, swaying and shivering all over. Thinking that she actually hugged such a guy in the water, Sally felt she was going to cry. Roddy, who was at the side, was completely dumbfounded. He did not expect the eldest miss, who was quite smart earlier, to suddenly drop her IQ. He looked at Sally, who was in a complete mess, and opened his mouth to say something. However, he suddenly felt that his throat was a little dry. He stared blankly ahead, and his expression became even more interesting than Sally's. The girl in front of him was naked and wrapped in a leopard skin. She was lying on the ground in such a sorry state. Although the leopard skin wasn't small, it wasn't enough to cover her lower body. If one were to talk about exposure, then Sally was probably exposed completely and really white. Why is it golden? When this thought flashed across his mind, Roddy finally realized what he had seen. When he thought of the words, "Don't look at indecent things," he swallowed his saliva and used his strong willpower to make himself look away. He turned his face and said loudly, Don't take it seriously, I'm just joking, it's really not like that. Don't be afraid." Sally got up in a panic and covered herself with the leopard skin in a flurry. After hearing Roddy's words, her pale face instantly turned red like a chameleon. The good impression that Roddy had accumulated in her heart was instantly destroyed. Sally was so angry that she almost bit her lip. Even the desire to rush over to punch and kick him wasn't enough to describe her resentment. At this moment, Sally even wanted to bite Roddy to death to vent her anger. Although Roddy was dull when it came to women, at this time, no matter how stupid he was, he realized that he had gone too far. Stammering, he said that he was going to get some food, picked up the bag and ran away with the animal skin, leaving Sally sitting silently in front of the fire and gnashing her teeth. Bastard, 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 bastard. Sally clenched her fists tightly and almost crushed her silver teeth. She looked at Roddy's fleeing back and wanted to say a few harsh words, but because of her self-restraint she couldn't say them. In the end, she just waved her fists and didn't say a word. Roddy ran for a long distance before he stopped. He shook his head and found that his mind was still filled with that golden color. Sigh, I've seen this kind of thing many times on the internet in my previous life. Why am I so agitated at this time? The technical geek Roddy patted his face. After thinking for a moment, he decided to count the spoils of this battle and wash away his messy emotions. If he couldn't win, he could just go back and get beaten up. In any case, he probably wouldn't die. Thinking of this, he rummaged through his bag and took out the poison sac left by the scorpion. Scorpion King Gilg's poison sac. Mission item unique: female scorpions will use all their venom to fight against enemies that obstruct their reproduction, even if it means death. The description below the poison sac made Roddy frown. It wasn't hard for him to think of a possibility. This scorpion king named Gilgs should be breeding its next generation. Could it be that the poisonous scorpion it gave birth to was the fellow named Thyrix? Male scorpions could only mate twice in their lifetime, while female scorpions could only give birth once. In the current situation, Roddy felt that he had strangled the unborn Thyrix in its mother's womb. Recalling the scene of the Scorpion King recklessly trying to eat the fish in the trap, Roddy understood a little. Perhaps because it was about to give birth, its desire for food was far greater than usual. This poison sac didn't have much use for Roddy. Although its level wasn't low, it didn't seem to have any use other than to coat his weapon with poison. Keeping the poison sac, Roddy looked at his character attribute. As he had killed a boss that was a level higher than him, the experience points that this scorpion had given him far exceeded the sum of the previous battles, reaching an astonishing 2,580 points. This meant that after reaching level 4, he was less than 2,000 experience points away from level 5. Even he didn't expect to level up so quickly. Thinking of how he was getting closer and closer to level 10, the threshold for class advancement, Roddy realized that he had to make ample preparations in advance. The reason why he thought so was because there was a common saying in the game: only after class advancement will you be able to understand the essence of the game. For the current Roddy, the basic class of army soldier could only give him some of the most basic skills. After reaching level 10, he could add points to the basic talent tree to improve himself. After class advancement, he would be able to unlock the advanced class talent tree, battle stance, optional skills, and many other abilities that would have a great impact on battles. Compared to now, the difference was like the difference between clouds and mud. Before level 10, the difference between players was nothing more than 1 or 2 basic skills and attribute. At the moment, Roddy, who had reached level 4, had 180 HP, and his strength and dexterity had been enhanced. As the saying goes, high risk, high reward. For the current situation, Roddy could accept it. At the very least, Sally's life was saved, and he had gained a lot of experience points. The HP regeneration bug after leveling up meant that there were no wounds on his body, so the following escape route seemed to be even easier for Roddy. He still had 6 arrows that could be used, and the hornbow and scimitar could be used normally. With the previous example, Roddy, who originally wanted to relax and lie down for a while, no longer dared to let his guard down. Looking at Sally, who seemed to have calmed down and was gradually falling asleep, Roddy found a tree stump and sat down, silently standing guard. What he didn't know was that not far away, the girl covered in leopard skin gently clenched her fists, resisting the desire to say something. At the same time, Francis, who was still in Vic Village, could not sit still. Waiting was always a kind of torture. For him, who had already made up his mind to eradicate his sister, he would not rest until he heard the news of Sally's death. Constantine's cavalry unit had almost searched every possible place. Logically speaking, even if Sally could dig a hole and hide like a groundhog, they should at least be able to find some traces. But the reality sent chills down his spine. No one could find any traces, not even footprints. 10 orc wolf riders died just like that, and it seemed that they died in the hands of one person. The corpses of old Jerson and the others were also found. It seemed that they had fought a desperate battle with the beastmen. They had actually cut down 3 wolf riders before they fell. It seemed that they had fought with the conviction that they would die for sure. This meant that it was impossible for Sally to escape the siege of the orcs. But the fact that she disappeared into thin air was right in front of them, and no one could do anything about it. When he thought that Sally might have survived, Francis felt very agitated. He knew the abilities of his men and the strong people in his territory. Maybe there were a few strong guardian knights in Duke's father's place in Hollier City who had such abilities, but in the entire outer fortress and the remote villages, who could say that they could fight 10 wolf riders alone? What's more, the fierce battle also proved that the man did not just kill 10 people with ease. There were very few people who were good at using bows and arrows and were good at shooting. In Francis' impression, there was no one in the whole territory who was famous for his archery. Could it be the wood elves? But thinking about it, the wood elves in the silent forest did not seem to have anything to do with humans, so he gave up on this ridiculous idea. He was in a very bad mood, but he could not keep waiting in Vic Village. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain it to his father. Although his father was cold to the point that he did not ask about the relationship between him and Sally, Francis did not think that this kind of thing could be fooled. So now he felt like he was walking on thin ice, and did not dare to make the slightest mistake. Let Knight Macy continue to send soldiers to patrol along the small roads outside Hollier City. Yes, my lord. His confidant took the order and left. Francis immediately rode on the horse that the servants had prepared for him, and said in a low voice, "Return to Hollier City immediately. Even if she can escape from my pursuit, she will still have to enter the city gate in broad daylight." The accompanying soldiers tidied up their equipment, and then followed the Earl to the center of Efta territory in the southeast. Francis believed that with the speed of his horse, it was impossible for Sally, who was constantly evading the search, to return to Hollier City ahead of him. In fact, he had always had a premonition that Sally had hidden in the silent forest. But if she was really that stupid, Francis would feel relieved. Because after entering the forest, there was basically no hope of coming out alive. Hundreds of people from Efta territory entered the forest every year, and basically all of them ended up without a trace. For many years, there had never been an adventurer who had passed through the forest alive. It was not that there were no people who were lucky enough to hunt rare magic beasts and sell them for a high price, but basically no one dared to return to the forest again because they deeply felt fear. There were things in the forest that no one could fight against, and the ancestors of the Lucifron family had set a rule: never step into the silent forest. At this time, I don't have enough time and patience to wait. Chapter 38. Floating clouds floated across the sky. Under the sun, on the lush green meadow, there were some crooked corpses strewn across the wilderness. Vultures unique to the grassland circled around and landed. Occasionally, crows would fly by, cawing strangely. These black shadows brought a somewhat gloomy feeling to the quiet grassland. The blood had already coagulated, and the stench of corpses had gradually spread. The battlefield left behind by Roddy when he saved Sally remained the same. Francis's men had already checked the place, but they had no time to deal with the corpses of the orcs, so the original appearance of the battlefield was almost intact. When the sun was high up in the sky, a figure that should not have been there was squatting down and carefully examining the corpses of the orcs who had died horribly. From any point of view, judging the complete process of a battle through the corpses and the traces left on the ground was an obscure skill. Because in the eyes of ordinary people, these corpses had almost no value after being pecked by crows and exposed to the scorching sun. But for Sodeler, who had followed his father to participate in the Southern Border War at the age of 13, these corpses were enough to provide him with a lot of information about the battle. 3 days after the battle, the dead warwolves, the maggot-covered orcs, and the warhorses that had died from the impact were still there. When Sodeler's huge body appeared on the battlefield, a flock of crows and vultures that were pecking at the corpses suddenly flew up. He endured the stench and looked over all the corpses. Although he was still expressionless, he was a little shocked by the fatal wounds. Good archery. Sodeler sighed from the bottom of his heart. He had already seen the tragic battlefield left behind by old Jerson and the others to intercept the wolf riders. Sodeler, who had studied the orcs for a long time, had also determined the identity of the wolf riders. Combined with the letter that Roddy had shown him, it was not difficult for Sodeler to come to a conclusion. That was, Roddy knew the enemy's plot and saved Sally at the critical moment, who should have had no hope of survival. At this thought, Sodeler couldn't help but feel a little excited. He was the descendant of a noble family that had suffered a calamity. His dream was to have enough power and status to revive his family and take revenge. But the young him was struck by reality time and time again, and finally became depressed and dispirited. While he was in Fenck's village, he was a little estranged from the scouts. Everyone knew that Zordler's ability was far beyond that of a mere scout. However, he found that he could not see any hope in front of him. Revive the family? If they couldn't even defeat a colleague from a stronghold, how could they talk about revival? Revenge? They had to flee with the entire village when they encountered the orcs. How could they talk about revenge? His blood gradually cooled, and Sodeler had quietened down as if he had accepted his fate. But now, he felt as if something was being reignited in his chest. Could it be because he had seen someone really do something heroic? Regardless of whether it was Roddy who did all of this, Sodeler was certain that a powerhouse that could easily kill 10 wolf riders and quietly leave had appeared here. In this society, How could a descendant of a declining noble not want to make a name for himself? How could he not want to become a powerful lord? His fingers were slightly trembling. Sodeler felt that he had not been so excited for a long time. He stood up and combined the map of Ifta's territory in his mind, carefully thinking about the route that Sally and Roddy took to leave this place. But then he found that he could not figure out where they went at all. Because of the inexplicable conflict between Francis and Sally, everything became even more confusing. In the end, Sodeler decided to go to Norland Village, where Roddy used to live. He needed to confirm whether all of this was Roddy's doing. If it was, then Sodeler, who had seen the benchmark, already had his own plan. He wanted to become stronger. He had enough of being a scout all day long. As long as there was a chance to improve his strength, he would not give it up. Riding back, Sodeler's figure gradually disappeared on the horizon. At this point, the historical events that should have been settled seemed to have entered a truly chaotic stage. Francis had already prepared for the worst and was even ready to wait outside Hullier to kill Sally. Sodeler, who was originally an outsider, changed his future plans because of the battlefield left by Roddy. In history, Hullier, where Sally's death was supposed to be buried, was now as quiet as before, as if nothing had happened. In the silent forest, Roddy and Sally were racing with Francis, but no one knew who the final winner would be. "It's really hard for me to imagine. Are you really 37 years old?" Sally did not know how many times she had said this. Along the way, she had seen too many new things that she had never come into contact with before. Apart from the things that happened in the Stello Creek Instance dungeon, the experience of Roddy bringing her out of the silent forest at an extremely fast speed was definitely unforgettable. According to the usual methods of adventurers in the books, the best way to escape from the forest was to walk along a small stream or river. However, no one told Sally that the speed of drifting along a river was countless times faster than walking, and that it was countless times less laborious. "I traded my life for it. Of course, I remember it clearly," Roddy answered without raising his head. He was tidying up the things he had just bought from Kyger Town by the stream. In the early morning, the two of them used a raft made of vines and trees to swim down the river at an astonishing speed. Before Sally could react, they had already walked out of the edge of the forest. This was probably the first time for adventurers in the silent forest to do something like this. However, for the player, Roddy, this method of leaving the forest was nothing out of the ordinary. In the earth fissure that he had experienced before his rebirth, everything was as realistic as possible. The players had put in a lot of effort to simulate the environment of the forest, such as humidity, heat, mosquito bites, and so on. There were no quick teleportation points or return scrolls. Everything depended on oneself. Therefore, after continuous research, the players who came to the silent forest had basically learned to use this method to leave the forest along the river. Roddy still clearly remembered the scene of the river being blocked when there were too many people on the way back. Now that there was no one in the river, he felt a little uncomfortable. It had been 5 days since the night they killed the orc. Since the exposure incident that day, the two of them had spent a night in silence. The next day, Sally seemed to understand that it was not the time for her to throw a tantrum, so she gradually returned to normal and did not mention anything about what had happened before. As such, Roddy secretly rejoiced that he had escaped a calamity. It was now noon, and Roddy had gone to the nearby town of Kig alone and returned. He had sold the leopard skin and the spider's venom sac at a relatively low price in the town and exchanged the silver coins for a lot of food and things he needed. His next plan was to change Sally's appearance and bring her through the town that was already patrolled by Francis' spies. They would circle around the small path of the Ender Mine and return to Hullier City. They could not ride a horse or rent a carriage along the way because they would be questioned by the Constantine cavalry and the town guards. Roddy chose to walk through the town because it would not attract too much attention. Once they were out of the town, everything would be fine. Are we really going to enter the town of Kig? Sally took the clothes that Roddy handed to her. It seemed that she did not quite believe in Roddy's decision. Your brother is probably on his way to Hollier City right now, but he'll definitely have people watching him along the way. He won't just wait for you in Hollier City. I'm afraid he's already paid a huge price to stop you. Roddy took out a purplish-black plant stalk from the bag he bought. He casually found a pebble and knocked it on the stalk with a ding-dang-dang sound. So, we have to go back before he does, or I'm afraid you won't even be able to enter Hollier City. Thinking of her brother's style of doing things, Sally also understood the crisis of the current situation. Speaking of which, if she could return to Hollier City in advance, she had enough ways to ensure her own safety. But now, no matter how she thought about it, she could not understand why Roddy had such strong confidence. Francis must have returned by riding a fast horse, and she had to rely on walking after all. Time is tight. Let's dye my hair first. At this moment, Roddy gradually returned to his previous technical geek state. He was extremely efficient and did not waste time talking nonsense. The things in his hands could temporarily dye Sally's dazzling platinum hair black. This was the first step of disguise. Along the way, Sally gradually got used to Roddy's style of doing things. Although the previous few things still made her feel ashamed and angry, it was clear that Sally gradually understood that the guy in front of her, to put it bluntly, he was purely retarded when it came to women. After thinking about this, she was not as angry as she was at the beginning. Sometimes, she even showed a submissive attitude towards Roddy's words. But submissive was submissive. When she lay on the ground and watched Roddy earnestly dye her hair, she could not help but let her imagination run wild. It was said that a man was the most attractive when he was serious. For Sally, who had never had close contact with the opposite sex, Roddy's current appearance was indeed somewhat indescribable. No matter how rational a woman was, she was still emotional. Before, the two had some awkwardness, misunderstandings, and a life-and-death crisis. When she thought about it, she felt that there seemed to be an inexplicable connection between them. But after her mood calmed down, this feeling was faint and not strong. It was just like a quiet stream flowing in the bottom of Sally's heart. It existed, but it did not make any noise. Lying on the ground, Sally looked at the blue sky. Her beautiful hair was scattered, and her posture was quiet and tranquil. Her eyes occasionally saw Roddy's swaying hand, but he was frowning and thinking about something in his hand. It seemed that he did not notice her gaze at all. What a strange fool he was. Chapter 39. Relatively speaking, Roddy didn't have too many emotions in his mind. At this time, all his attention was on dyeing Sally's hair. Because the dye was easy to fix, he was very careful to dye her hair strand by strand with his fingers, for fear of rubbing Sally's cheeks. So at this time, he had no time to think about what Sally was thinking. After a moment, Sally, who felt a little dull, began to find a topic. I didn't know that hair could be dyed. You should know now. Will it always be like this? Just wash it a few more times. Why are you like this? Well, what? How is it? Nothing, Sally pouted slightly. She felt that the guy in front of her sometimes was like a block of wood. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly asked, Roddy, what color do you like? Roddy's movements paused slightly. Red. Unconsciously, Roddy had let down his guard against this little girl who he had no contact with before. It seemed that because of the dangerous environment and lack of sleep, he had gradually forgotten this little girl's original extraordinary mind and means, and only regarded her as an ordinary girl who only knew how to agree and nod. After this unconscious answer, Sally was silent for a few seconds, but she asked a question that Roddy couldn't think of. Her hair is red, right? Roddy's fingers trembled nervously, but he quickly calmed down. Who is she? Roddy knew very well that since his rebirth, the shadow of her always flashed in front of him, which made him sad, but also made him feel lucky. Yes, it's red, a bit like a bonfire at night, very warm. This was the first time that Roddy made a specific description of the unknown, her, in front of Sally. The meticulous Sally looked at Roddy's somewhat gloomy eyes, as if her heart was inexplicably stabbed. Roddy didn't continue to talk about that woman, but raised his hand and said, "That's good, let's set off after the hair naturally dries. Now put on this clothes, I'll turn around, I won't look." After saying that, the atmosphere was no longer as awkward as it was a few days ago. Sally put on her clothes silently, but found that she trusted Roddy so much that she wouldn't feel embarrassed even if he turned his back on her. Was this shameless? Or? She shook her head and chased the flustered emotions out of her mind. However, she had to admit that whenever Roddy was in her field of vision, even if it was just his back, she would always feel an inexplicable sense of security in her heart. However, after picking up the clothes, she frowned. "This looks like a man's clothes?" With his back facing him, Roddy coughed twice and replied, "It's a man's clothes. There's a strip of cloth there. It's best to wrap it around your chest so that it's not so obvious. You know, that, I also did it for—" Shut up. Sally's face blushed again. It was better if Roddy didn't say it. After all, the fact that she had a big chest would make a girl a little embarrassed. She scolded him in her heart again. She just found him pleasing to the eye, but now her mind was filled with the desire to kick him a few times. This guy was so stubborn. How could she make him suffer? Sally thought for a moment, rolled her eyes, and had an idea. She tried to calm her emotions, wrapped her chest as tightly as possible with the strip of cloth, and then put on the whole set of clothes. She adjusted her expression, thought about the plan she had just come up with, and said with the corner of her mouth slightly raised, "I'm done." Roddy turned around, and what appeared in front of him was no longer the oval-faced girl with long platinum hair, but a tomboy with black hair tied up and a straight posture. With this set of clothes, Sally imperceptibly had a heroic spirit. However, Sally wanted to disguise herself as a man that others couldn't see through, so Roddy began to make some adjustments for her according to his previous experience of disguising, slightly patting her shoulders with leather, and smearing a kind of brown oil on her cheeks, making her originally white skin slightly darker. Roddy, who paid attention to details, even let Sally smear it on her hands, feet, and neck to prevent any flaws. Then he also used a special gel made from animal fat to simulate a scar on Sally's cheek. This scar destroyed the tranquil temperament of her oval-faced face, and made the originally gentle eyebrows suddenly have a bit of a murderous look. Finally, Roddy stood in front of her, reached out his hand to pull up the hood of the clothes, and gently covered Sally's dyed black hair, and nodded with satisfaction. In this way, she really looked a bit like a mercenary. For such a work, the technical geek Roddy couldn't help but feel a little proud. Obviously, in his eyes, Sally was not a girl at all. It seemed that there was not much difference between her and those that had just been painted, and she belonged to the category of art. Roddy looked around her a few times, muttering, "Just a little short," and so on. When he felt that it was about time, he wanted to say, "Get ready to go," but he found that Sally was staring at him without blinking. The two of them looked at each other. Sally had a plan in her heart, and her eyes were a little curious and tentative. At this time, she did not avoid Roddy's eyes at all. Although under various disguises, she was completely no longer like a girl, but at this time, her sudden appearance of this affectionate gaze made Roddy shiver unexpectedly. "Just like this, is it okay?" Sally deliberately took a step forward, and her voice suddenly became very gentle. With this step, their faces were less than 30 centimeters apart, and it looked like a distance that only lovers would have. Roddy seemed to be under a paralysis spell. He swallowed his saliva, and his expression was slightly distorted. In his heart, he was thinking about what the problem was. This is not fucking right, I just changed her appearance, not some kind of mental control. Is she schizophrenic? What the hell does this look mean? Why is it like a Cheongyao drama? Although he thought so in his heart, Roddy, after all, had never really looked at a woman so affectionately. This emotional idiot was a little confused. His brain seemed to be flushed by the toilet, and all the thoughts were flushed away, when he suddenly woke up and realized that his body's reaction was not quite right. He suddenly looked away, took a few steps back, and took a deep breath. No. Fuck, there is definitely no problem with my sexual orientation. Why didn't I think about it when she wore a dress? Why do I still have this strange feeling after dressing up as a man? That can't be right. I'm not gay. What the hell is going on? Is this girl deliberately messing with me? Roddy adjusted his mood for a long time, and suddenly thought of this possibility. He suddenly looked up and wanted to say something, but found that Sally was still staring at him seriously. He immediately lost, muttered, "Let's go," and turned to walk forward gloomily. Behind him, Sally couldn't help but smile, because she found that her attempt had actually succeeded. To deal with this guy who didn't know how to talk to a woman, as long as she took the initiative to stand in front of him and pretend to be affectionate, the other party would collapse without a fight. Sally found that this bastard usually seemed to have a screw loose, but when he really faced her at a close distance, he actually was a little afraid. As for the reason, Sally didn't think too much, she just couldn't help laughing proudly in her heart. Who asked you to bully me like that before? From now on, just wait to be defeated. Sally walked with light steps, and her mood seemed to be happier than ever. The speed at which Roddy passed through the forest of silent words was a legend to the adventurers in Ifta's territory, but no matter how fast he went, he was actually taking a detour. At this moment, going through Gig Town was a race against time, because there was a rugged stone road outside the town, even horses couldn't pass through. The fastest way was to go through the town directly. If he took a detour, the time it would take was not enough for Roddy to return to Hollier City before Francis. Even though he was confident in his ability to disguise himself, he was still a little worried. As a ranger, he knew very well that even if she changed her skin color, hair color, and even added a scar, Sally's iconic oval face and temperament would not change too much in such a short period of time. If it was just a simple night of Fort Compton, it was basically impossible for him to recognize Sally, but Roddy, who always paid attention to details, dared not let his guard down. If he met Francis in person, he was afraid that even if he drew 10 more scars on Sally's face, it would be useless. Sally's body odor, walking posture, voice, tone, and even any of her movements could let people who were familiar with her know who she was. Roddy would never underestimate Francis, who had enough scheming and brains. After all, this young duke was only 20 years old, and in Roddy's memory, he had indeed become the Duke of Ifta's territory. In 3 years, he had withstood the pressure of countless lords in the entire kingdom, and almost succeeded in a counterattack. Although Francis was still young, Roddy would not underestimate his brain and ability because of that. So at this moment, walking on the streets of Gig Town, Roddy looked unusually calm, but in fact, he was carefully sifting through all the suspicious candidates. Following behind him, Sally held a straw in her mouth at Roddy's request, trying to pretend to be indifferent. As a middle-level town on the border, Gig Town belonged to Viscount Tranca, who could be counted as a powerful lord in Duke Lucifran's territory. Objectively speaking, the owner of Norland Village and Fenks Village was Lord Kirk, and Lord Kirk's superior was this Viscount Tranca. So in name, this Viscount's status was quite high, and his wealth and power were equally amazing. Just like at this time in Gig Town, Roddy could see markets and shops that could not be found in Norland Village. Although the permanent population was only about 1,000 people, for the Kingdom of Karen, it was already a big town. Chapter 40. The Chamber of Commerce. There are 3 blacksmith shops. The layout is not the same. The location of the granary is also wrong. 588, that's the autumn of 590. What was that again? That's not right, there shouldn't be such an area here. Sally followed behind, listening to Roddy's words with some doubts, feeling that he was a little strange. Her eyes occasionally saw the performance of the magicians in the lively street market, but she did not dare to stop. In this era, the existence of mages was generally accepted by the public. However, there was one difference. The mages that people generally accepted weren't the terrifying fellows that could throw fireballs all over the sky or cast forbidden spells to destroy the world from time to time as they pleased. The so-called magic was also not a product created purely for destruction and war. More often, the role of magic was used to transform and optimize society. Rich lords would hire magicians to use level 0 spells like Magician's Hand to help with some heavy labor, greatly increasing labor efficiency. Level 0 spells, in the category of magician spells, were also known as magic tricks. Things like sand raising spell, illumination spell, communication spell, and so on, existed to facilitate life and entertain the public. Similar to the circus that Sally saw, there would usually be 1 or 2 such magicians appearing, performing magic tricks, bringing some novelty to the toiling farmers, and earning some hard-earned money. Speaking of it, it could also be regarded as a kind of labor profession. Roddy did not feel much about these magicians. After the game server opened, magician was once an unpopular profession. Perhaps this had something to do with the fact that the low-level magician profession needed to fight hand-to-hand in the early stage, because in the early stage, level 0 spells didn't have much attack power. After painstakingly accumulating experience and dungeons, they found that the power of level 1 and 2 spells was really heartbreaking. Most magicians lost the patience to continue and changed their profession, because until the appearance of level 4 spells, the magician profession was almost always the last existence in the team. No matter what, they were not popular. However, if a mage managed to pass the threshold of level 30, what awaited him was a pleasant surprise after a long period of depression. But now, Roddy was not interested in recalling the sorcerer's 3-year history of blood and tears. He was just very puzzled by the appearance of Kyger Town in front of him, because he found that the Geiger Town in his impression was quite different from the one in front of him. The most obvious difference was that the entire southeast area was not as empty as he remembered. Instead, it was full of shops opened by various craftsmen. There was even a large market bustling with activity in 590. Kyger Town auctioned off this piece of land. What was the reason? Roddy recalled the scene when players had the first batch of funds and began to purchase real estate after the launch of the server. Studios supported by financial groups frantically purchased land. Because there were a lot of vacant real estate in Keg Town, the prices were cheap and it became one of the hottest real estate projects at that time. As for the reason, Roddy frowned and thought for a long time, and finally remembered: fire. A big fire burned down half of Kyger Town in the autumn of 589. That was before the launch of the server. Viscount Trenko was quite distressed for a while because of this. After the launch of the server, almost every player here at that time could receive a mission in the name of the Viscount, in order to restore the original economic level of Kyger Town as soon as possible. Thinking of this, Roddy's thoughts turned and naturally associated it with the road he was going to take next. Fighting against the orcs and reviving the country was definitely not a simple matter of raising one's arms and calling for countless people to flock to the country. If there was anything that could unite this country with a solid social class structure, it would only be 2 words: benefits. If people of different classes were pieces of separated bricks, the word benefits was enough to become solid cement, allowing these guys of different classes to build a fortress wall. Roddy, a technical geek, had an absolute advantage in combat, but in terms of business, he had never had much contact with it. After all, he was a lone ranger. He had always relied on himself. Occasionally, he would team up to fight dungeons, and he had a kind of strangers don't get close lonesome personality. In this life, he was afraid that he could no longer travel the world alone like in the past. Roddy sighed. When he raised his head, he found that Sally was right beside him, looking at him curiously. I have always been curious. When you are in a daze, what are you thinking about in your head? Here, Roddy pointed to the shops in front of him. I am thinking about how to buy them and then make money for myself. This made Sally laugh out loud. It was not because she thought that Roddy was bragging, but because she found the way he spoke funny. In the eyes of Sally or all the people in this social system, things like the shops and markets in Kiger Town did not have the concept of buying. The shops would have a trade guild, and the markets would also be registered in the trade guild. But in the end, most of the benefits they generated went to the Lord. Except for the Lord, it was basically a fool's dream to want to earn money from this group of people. You are really a strange guy. I really don't know why your brain would have these ideas. Sally pointed to the shops and continued, these rules have been fixed for hundreds of years. The lords have always been the biggest beneficiaries. You want to get a share of it? You have to get Viscount Tranca's consent. But I think that stingy lord will definitely not agree. Sally was very familiar with the nobles in the territory. It was only then that Roddy remembered her identity as Duke's daughter. He cursed himself for forgetting Sally's ability, and immediately humbly asked for advice. Sally had never seen such a studious side of Roddy. After a few words of praise, she could not help but feel a little smug. After a few words of reply, she felt like she had become a teacher. This novel feeling was something she had never experienced before, and she could not help but talk a little more. The two walked and chatted about the influence of the aristocratic feudal system and the commercial system. When they finally passed through the town and were ready to leave for the last supply station, before Hollier City, Roddy was satisfied and let Sally drink some water. He then turned around and continued to lead the way with a smile. Only then did Sally realize that she seemed to have said too much. She was a little angry, and wanted to chase after them to say a few harsh words. However, just as the two of them were about to leave the town in a relaxed and carefree atmosphere, a group of cavalrymen suddenly appeared, abruptly shattering this relaxed and carefree atmosphere. Sally stopped in her tracks and stared blankly ahead. Sally's good luck of smoothly traversing through the silent forest seemed to have come to an end here. Sally looked in front of her and nearly cried out in alarm. That was because the leader of the group of over a dozen cavalrymen was the one she was currently avoiding. Francis? Le Saffron. Of course, Roddy also knew Francis. However, he knew the Lord of Efuta, who would grow a mustache years later and would eventually be hanged by Sodeler's order. At this moment, Francis was a lot younger than he was then. His medium-length blonde hair was neat and tidy, and he was wearing a leather armor that wasn't gorgeous but was well cut. His posture was upright, making him stand out among the group of soldiers. At this time, the sky was getting dark. Roddy didn't need to think to know that the other party came from the direction of Vic Village and wanted to rest here for the night. The horses were very tired, and the soldiers' lips were chapped. But what worried Roddy the most was that at this time, the group of cavalry that was 50 meters away jumped off their horses and led their horses into the town of Kiger. They happened to be walking right in front of Roddy and Sally. This is 2F** King coincidental, isn't it? At this time, Roddy had no way to turn back because he found that this straight street had no corner to hide in. Turn back. Now, even a wrong move could make Francis, whose mind was full of looking for Sally, extremely vigilant. What should I do? Not only Roddy, but Sally's mood at this time could be said to have completely fallen to the bottom of the valley. Because she also knew what kind of ability her brother had. Although she tried hard to imitate the man's movements and expressions, Francis, who had lived in the ducal palace since childhood, already had the title of elementalist. His senses were far more sensitive than ordinary people. When in the ducal palace, he could even accurately determine Sally's identity just by the interval between his steps without seeing her. Now it seemed that both Roddy and Sally had walked into the trap of their own accord. The atmosphere suddenly became abnormally stagnant. At this time, Roddy didn't stop walking because he knew that if he made any abnormal movements, he might easily attract the enemy's attention. So he just quietly moved his body to block Francis's line of sight, trying his best not to let the enemy notice Sally behind him. But this was not the only solution. At this time, he was very anxious. Could he really only rely on luck? Roddy was never a person who pinned his hopes on luck. He thought for a moment, his lips slightly moved, and in a low voice, he called out the skill bar. This was what he always did when he was in a desperate situation, because he understood that sometimes some skills that he didn't use at all would actually have a miraculous effect. But at this moment, looking at the few skills that could not be more basic, his heart gradually sank to the bottom of the valley. Wait. Suddenly, Roddy found that there was a lit icon next to his basic skill bar. Because he had never called out a complete skill bar since his rebirth, at this moment, the equipment skill bar that should have been empty unexpectedly had a skill that he had never noticed before. Looking at the icon, Roddy still did not stop walking, but at this moment, he frowned and saw a line of words in front of him. Mysterious necklace unique use. Stealth, level 3, lasts for 60 seconds. Activation spell. Oel Kala, this necklace of unknown origin seems to have been through many years, but the ability that was once given has not been lost. What is this? A pillow when you are sleepy? Chapter 41. At that moment, Roddy felt like he was in a dream. He had actually seen this necklace before. It was on the second day after his rebirth when he checked his equipment. He did not take a closer look at it because it was a simple, white equipment. He thought it was Roddy's family heirloom and had no other use other than for decoration. But now this necklace came with a skill? It was not Roddy's fault for being careless. In Earthbreaker, there was a 99% chance that any equipment that could release skills would not be of white quality. It could even be said that white-grade equipment that could release skills was something that Roddy had only heard of in his 5 years of playing the game. He had never seen it with his own eyes. What was stealth? That was the signature skill of the advanced profession, assassin. Moreover, the stealth skill that an assassin would learn after advancing to level 10 would only be level 1. Level 3 stealth meant that once it was used, enemies within 6 levels would not be able to detect it. Roddy did not understand why this necklace could have such a high-level stealth skill. He looked at it again and was surprised to find that it did not have any activation requirement. In other words, no matter who this necklace was given to, the person could directly activate the level 3 stealth skill on the necklace by chanting the incantation to release it. Raising his head, Francis and the others were already approaching him. They were less than 30 meters away from him. Roddy made a decision almost immediately. Without saying a word, he took off the necklace and threw it behind him. He pretended to cough, covered his mouth with his hand and said in a low voice, "Catch, put it on." Sally, who was extremely nervous, did not even see what Roddy had thrown. She could only watch as the necklace fell on the ground in front of her. Crack! The sudden sound of a jar breaking shocked Sally. She was so nervous that her legs were a little sore and she almost screamed out loud. Then she realized that one of the knights who was leading a horse had knocked over a water jar on the side of the road. Roddy almost shouted, "God is helping me," in his mind. He saw Francis and the other soldiers looking back at the broken water jar. He immediately turned around and waved his hand crazily to signal Sally to put on the necklace. Sally didn't even think about it. She bent down to pick up the necklace and hastily put it around her neck. Before he could figure out why Roddy was doing this, he heard Roddy's voice coming from the front. "Repeat after me and don't ask why, O.L. Kala." When Francis and the others turned their eyes back to the front, everything in front of them seemed to be the same as before. Roddy tried hard to calm his excitement. He did not look back nor did he speak. He was like a mercenary who instinctively envied the nobles. He stared at the cavalrymen in front of him and moved sideways to make way for them. He looked up at the horses and the equipment of the soldiers with fascination. After that, he walked past the cavalrymen. Francis was less than 3 meters away from Roddy. Even Roddy could smell the light perfume that nobles often sprayed on Francis's body. Francis glanced at him and seemed to stop at the horn bow on Roddy's back for half a second. After making sure there was nothing unusual, Francis looked away expressionlessly and continued to walk forward. This was the first face-to-face confrontation between Roddy and Francis. However, it seemed that the Earl in front of him would never think that this ordinary-looking mercenary was the culprit who disrupted all his plans. He would also not believe that Sally, whom he had been trying so hard to find, was less than 2 meters away from him. The stealth spell took effect. This skill, which could only be used by an advanced assassin, completely covered Sally's figure. Because of the level 3 stealth spell, Francis would not be able to detect anything unusual even if he stood in front of her. Sally held her breath and did not even dare to look at Francis. She felt that these 10 seconds were extremely long. She could see her body disappearing from her sight. Even the shadow of the setting sun had disappeared without a trace. Sally, whose fingers were cold, gradually recovered from her nervous state. She saw that Roddy was still walking forward as if nothing had happened, and Sally instinctively followed him. The two were still in the same state when they passed through the village entrance guarded by the guards. The guards only saw Roddy in mercenary attire, but they did not notice Sally, who was behind him, at all. After walking out of the gig town in such a thrilling way, when Sally's stealth spell had failed, Roddy had already grabbed her arm and started to run without saying anything. The two directly turned into the remote, winding path outside the town and rushed out until they were completely out of the range of the gig town. The two finally stopped. They gasped for air and sat down on the ground like dehydrated fish. For a long time, the two didn't say anything. Only the sound of bellows could be heard in the air. The feeling of survival gradually rose. The two raised their heads at the same time and looked at each other as if their hearts were connected. Roddy opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he found that Sally had opened her arms and rushed over directly. She hugged Roddy fiercely. Her arms clasped his body tightly, as if this was the only way to ease the fear in her heart. Roddy was stunned in place like a fool. He felt as if he had been electrocuted all of a sudden. His mouth was open like a toad that had been punched. The faint fragrance from Sally's body wafted straight into his nostrils, making him feel as if his brain had suddenly crashed. It's okay. It's really okay." Roddy didn't know how to comfort her. He patted her back stiffly and carefully, and Sally quickly let go of her hand. Seeing his helpless and flustered look, the original panic expression gradually disappeared, and then she grinned and laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha. As if to release the indescribable pressure in her heart just now, she laughed so hard that she swayed back and forth, even without any manners to speak of. Just when Roddy wondered if he should remind her not to laugh until she was out of breath, Sally finally stopped and reached out to take off the necklace. "Here, your necklace. Take it." Handing the necklace that saved her life to Roddy, Sally looked at Roddy and couldn't help but whisper curiously, "It seems to be a magic item. You know, I will definitely ask why you have such a thing on you. But I thought about it and felt that if it's not convenient for you to answer, it's better not to say." Although she said so, she then glanced at Roddy's neck and whispered, "This magic necklace. It can be sold for a sky-high price in the auction in Hollier City." Although she didn't covet it, Sally's tone was a little reproachful, as if she was blaming Roddy for not telling her in advance that he had such a trump card. In fact, at this moment, Roddy was also puzzled about the origin of this item. He was full of doubts and confusion about this necklace that suddenly saved his life, and even had an inexplicable fear. This fear stemmed from the unknown. This necklace seemed to be out of the scope of Roddy's understanding of the Earthbreaker, so he couldn't determine its origin at all. The classification of equipment in Earthbreaker was detailed and had its own naming rules. Whether it was a PvE player, a life player, or a PvP player, they were all incomparably familiar with these rules. But at this moment, looking at the state of this necklace, Roddy was completely uncertain. Mysterious necklace unique use. Cast stealth, level 3, duration, 60 seconds. Activation incantation. Kala, this necklace of unknown origin seems to have been through many years, but the ability that was once bestowed upon it has not been lost. Cooldown time, 30 minutes, 28 minutes remaining. Compared to the previous description, Roddy saw that it had an additional description of cooldown time. This further proved that this necklace was extraordinary. This was because most of the magic items in the game, other than those that could passively increase attributes or auras, 99% of the items that could actively cast skills had a limited number of uses. Roddy once had a bracer that could cast a skill similar to Spider-Man's web entanglement. It was an excellent piece of equipment for PvP as a control skill. However, after using this skill 10 times, the bracer became an ordinary item, and it could no longer cast skills. Any item that could cast an unlimited number of skills meant that the value of the item itself was higher than all other magic items of the same level, not to mention that this mysterious necklace came with an extremely practical stealth skill. In the face of most monsters or enemies, no one would imagine how useful this necklace would be to Roddy. What kind of person was Roddy before Roddy was reincarnated into his body? Looking back at his memory, he was just an ordinary guy. His parents died and he was all alone. He worked as a scout at the border. Other than that, he didn't seem to have any achievements, let alone ambitions. Under such circumstances, where did this necklace come from? Roddy looked at the simple necklace in front of his chest and furrowed his brows. Logically speaking, the attribute color of this necklace was blue, which represented excellent. If the skill level was higher, it would have been purple, which represented epic. But in reality, it was white, which represented common. Could it be that there was something special about this necklace? He did not know what kind of material the black metal chain was made of, and the appearance of the pendant was also not eye-catching. It was just 3 black diamond-shaped ornaments, and he could not see any other information. Roddy sighed, as if he was talking to himself. I also just found out that this thing can let you stealth. Even the activation incantation is clear. Is this your first time using it? Sally was a girl who knew how to focus on the main point. She was not an illiterate village girl, but a noble girl who had a unique understanding of magic items. The key word, activation incantation, was the key to why Roddy was able to let her stand there steadily. If he had only put on the necklace and did not know how to activate the stealth spell, Sally would have been dead by now. Chapter 42. Sally didn't pursue Roddy's silence. Instead, she quietly followed beside him and looked at the darkening sky. Now, where are we going? Mine. After passing through the tunnel, we'll go straight to Hollier City. We can't stop tonight. With your brother's speed, we'll still be late. Roddy opened the bag on his back and took out a piece of bread he bought in Kigtown. After handing it to Sally, he uncorked the water bottle and drank some water. He pointed to the mountains in the distance and said, "We have to get there tonight. We'll avoid the mine guards and pass through the tunnel in the early morning. We'll probably reach Hollier City by tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow afternoon? Sally knew how far it was from Kigtown to Hollier City. If Francis rode at full speed, it would probably take another 3 days to get around the mountains. But according to Roddy, if they could reach Hollier City by tomorrow afternoon, they would arrive 2 days earlier than Francis. The tunnel in the mine can help us cross the mountains. I know some other ways to get through the mountains as soon as possible. Roddy took a bite of the bread and still didn't look at Sally. He lowered his head and said, "Don't ask me why I know these things. If we want to survive, we have to hurry." Okay. Sally followed his footsteps obediently. For the next few days, her ability to adapt made Roddy have a whole new level of respect for her. Perhaps it was because Sally's physique was not weak. Throughout the journey, she did not show any signs of physical exhaustion. This made Roddy think of a question that he had almost forgotten. How did Sally resist the scorpion's venom? Was it because of her high HP or because of her high resistance? The attribute of descendant of nobles couldn't bring any increase in resistance. Only high-end PvE or PvP players in the later stages of the game would prepare equipment with natural resistance to deal with special situations. Now that Sally was wearing clothes with no attributes, it was impossible for her to be resistant to poison. But regarding this, Roddy knew that Sally probably didn't know, so he didn't ask. They casually cut off 2 branches and turned them into wooden staff. The 2 stepped forward and sped towards the mines in Endel Mountain. Because of the previous lesson, Roddy, who chose this path, wasn't as calm as he was when he first entered the Silent Forest. In the Stello Creek dungeon, he had almost lost his life because of the Scorpion King's swapping. This was a lesson that Roddy would never forget in a short time. Similarly, looking at Endel Mine, he was ready to deal with any accident. Logically speaking, this route should be foolproof. In the eyes of the players, aside from being used for mining, there was also a very famous boss residing within the Endel Mine. In the words of the natives of the Central Plains, Earthbreaker was the chimera beast in many myths. However, the chimera in the game wasn't a powerful monster with a lion's body, a snake's tail and a goat's body, but a hybrid creature. In the Endel Mine, there was a tunnel that the miners would never go through. The tunnel ran through the side of the mountain, but after a period of operation, the miners often disappeared inexplicably. The culprit was a powerful chimera beast. In Roddy's impression, the chimera here wasn't a dungeon boss, but a wild spawn type. It was level 20, an existence that Roddy couldn't afford to provoke. In the past, this was a place that the major guilds would fight over. Because the drops from chimera beasts were a level higher than those from dungeons of the same level, the Endel Mine was always overcrowded due to the temptation of such scarce resources. Roddy had no way to deal with this high-level wild boss. The reason he came here was that the tunnel was enough to allow him to quickly cross the mountain range and reach Hollier City. Halfway through, he passed by a cave that was the living area of the chimera. However, he needed to leave the track and walk for 5 minutes to find it. Therefore, on this trip, Roddy wouldn't have any dealings with the chimera. The Ender Mine wasn't quiet at night. Not only was it the main source of iron ore in the Cullen Kingdom, but it also had a huge quarry. Slaves worked here day and night to transport minerals to the kingdom, but they didn't get anything other than a meal. The place was filled with criminals, homeless beggars, and good people thrown in by the nobles for various reasons. Roddy, who had done a mine mission before, naturally understood the dark side of this place. But now, he couldn't care less. He could only silently lead Sally around the range of the sentry tower and stopped in a low bush. It was past midnight. After walking nonstop for 5 hours, the two finally reached the entrance of the mine, which was more than a kilometer above sea level. Roddy didn't rush in. Instead, he took a break with Sally and ate something to replenish their strength. In the darkness, the two silently chewed on the bread that wasn't tasty. Because they knew that time was running out, the relaxed and joking atmosphere was gone. Jingle sounds could still be heard from the quarry not far away. Occasionally, there would be the sound of a whip cracking something. But most of the time, the sound was dull and monotonous. Roddy suddenly asked, "Did your father let you come here?" "No, my father never mentioned the mine. I just read about it in the historical documents of the Ifurta territory." Sally gently rubbed her sore calves and ankles. Her dyed black hair hung down. After changing her appearance, she seemed to have some masculinity. Along the way, she didn't complain at all. She didn't slow down Roddy's speed at all. At this time, her voice sounded a little tired, but also a little cautious. "If I were your father, I wouldn't let you come here to see either." Roddy felt that he had rested enough. He picked up his horn bow and seemed to have thought of something. He seemed to be talking to himself, the genius of a territory, the leader and the protector of the people. This is the definition of nobility. Am I right? Sally frowned at Roddy. She suddenly felt that his tone was a little strange, but she still nodded. The people here should be the opposite of nobility. They are the oppressed, the people who have lost their freedom, and the untouchables of the lowest level. The highest level of a territory is your world, and this place is another world. Roddy's words were very calm. He thought of the corrupt nobles and lords in the future. He thought of the vampires, who only cared about reaping benefits and ignoring the suffering of the people after the kingdom was torn apart in his memory. Such nobles almost occupied the entire ruling class of the kingdom. They were like a group of worms, gnawing the originally solid foundation of the kingdom until it was riddled with holes. In the end, it couldn't withstand a single blow. Squeezing benefits, cold-blooded. Every lord had such a side to them, and Sally herself understood this as well. However, this system had been deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts for the past 100 years. Ever since she was born, she had never felt that there was anything wrong with this system. However, Roddy's words also slightly touched her heart. Did the nobles and lords really fulfill their obligations? Did they bear the responsibilities that they should bear? This was a society based on contract. The feudal lords were responsible for protecting their citizens and providing for their livelihood. In return, the citizens would pay taxes and serve in the military. Even though that was the case, when the exploitation was severe, Sally knew that many people lived worse than a dog. "I have talked too much nonsense." Roddy realized that he had lost his composure. He thought that the girl beside him might be an important person who could turn the situation around. He restrained his emotions and pointed to the cave in the distance. "It's easy to sneak in. Once you see the supervisor, hide. You wear this necklace. If the situation is critical, use it. You have 1 minute to sneak in." Sally silently took the necklace, but her mind was still echoing with Roddy's words. For a girl who had received traditional aristocratic education from her father's generation, she had never heard such words before. It wasn't to say that her values were impacted, but her heart was still shaken because these words were spoken by Roddy. The current Roddy had become an extremely special existence in Sally's heart. As for how special, perhaps even she herself couldn't tell. Without any nonsense, Roddy carried a lot of equipment and broke into the mining area with Sally. He skillfully bypassed the supervisor and the miners, and entered the mine in the mountain. The journey seemed to be unusually smooth. Sally didn't use the necklace to sneak in, and Roddy didn't use his bow and arrow to kill the guards for fear of being discovered. As they approached the dim and dimly lit mine, the two of them could still hear the echoes of numerous pickaxes and stones colliding with each other. However, as Roddy dodged left and right at the forks in the mine for half an hour, the knocking sounds gradually disappeared. The smell in the air was a little strange, and it was a little damp and cold. Sally thought that she was brave, but at this time, she followed closely behind Roddy. Unknowingly, the distance between them had even shortened. Roddy lit a torch and walked in the spacious and empty tunnel. After confirming that the features here were no different from what he remembered, he came to a mining cart full of cobwebs and dust. He waved to Sally. "Are we going to ride this?" In the dim light, Sally could see that in front of Roddy was a rail car used to transport ores. There were 2 rails under the car. It seemed that the miners used this kind of rail car to improve the mining efficiency. But now, it seemed that Roddy was going to use it as a means of transportation. "Just follow me." Without saying anything, Roddy jumped on the car. After confirming that this thing had the same brake system as what he remembered, he put all his belongings on the car and pulled Sally to sit on it. "How does it move?" It was the first time that Sally sat on such a thing. She wanted to say something, but she saw Roddy jump off the car and run to the back to push it forward. Sally's gaze turned to the front of the car. She didn't know where the track extended in the darkness, but she suddenly had a bad premonition. Could it be? Before she could finish her words, she was interrupted by a sudden sound of metal friction. Roddy pushed the wooden mining cart with the strength of his arms, and then began to run slowly into the darkness. Chapter 43. What's this? Before Sally could finish her words, the mining cart suddenly changed its tilting angle. After a bumpy ride, it began to move down a long slope, and its speed was getting faster and faster. Sally seemed to feel something. She looked up at Roddy, who was holding a torch, and begged, "Don't tell me we're going to slide down like this?" "Slide down?" Roddy shook his head and inserted the torch into a groove on the mining cart. He smiled and said, "We're going down." As soon as his voice trailed off, the mining cart suddenly entered a very steep section of the road after another bumpy ride. Sally had never experienced weightlessness before. She couldn't help but scream out, but because the speed became faster and faster, her voice was quickly drowned out by the wind that blew past. The mining cart sped along the long and narrow tunnel like an orange lightning bolt. In Roddy's memory, this mine did not have such a steep track at the beginning. It was all because of the Chimera Beast. The Chimera Beast was good at drilling and climbing in caves, and even caused several mine collapses. The steep track was caused by the Chimera Beast digging under the ground all year round. Fortunately, Roddy remembered that there had never been an accident in this tunnel, and the players were happy to see the mining cart sliding like a roller coaster. Sally felt that she was about to cry. She was usually calculative and calm, but when she suddenly encountered such a violent movement that was close to free fall, she inevitably stiffened because of nervousness. Her hands even lost feeling because she used too much force. When the mining cart quickly turned the first corner, she lost her balance and fell into the mining cart. In order to stabilize herself, she instinctively stretched out her hands and desperately hugged Roddy's waist. It felt like a drowning person who had found a life-saving straw. Sally desperately held on to him. Her eyes were tightly closed. She could hear the wind whistling past her ears, but the tip of her nose could smell the familiar scent of Roddy. Taking a deep breath, she suddenly felt her tense nerves gradually relax. Sally tried to open her eyes. Although she was squinting because of the wind, she still looked up and saw Roddy's profile in the light of the torch. If possible, Roddy would rather ride a motorcycle or sit in a car with Sally in this position. Unfortunately, Roddy was riding a wooden mining cart that had been there for many years. He could not afford to be distracted in the slightest by the possibility of an accident happening at any time. So, he could only hold the edge of the mining cart with one hand and put the other hand on the brake lever, ready to brake at any time. According to his experience, it would take about an hour to see the end of the track. Although it was noisy and bumpy, it was the only way to return to Hullier. However, the vigilant Roddy's face suddenly changed after the cart had been sliding for nearly half an hour. "Damn it! What I'm afraid of is coming." At the end of his vision, a shadow suddenly appeared on the track, which made Roddy pull the brake lever hard. Sally, who was holding Roddy's waist, suddenly rolled back into the cart due to inertia. She then covered her ears in pain because of the screeching sound of the brake. Roddy gritted his teeth and pulled the brake lever for nearly 50 meters before it finally came to a stop. Roddy gasped for breath. He stared at the pile of solid wood and stones less than 3 meters in front of him. He was very glad that he did not let his guard down. If he had not seen the pile of obstacles in the distance with the help of the torch, he was afraid that the two of them would have ended up like the scene of a car accident. The air was filled with a strange burnt smell caused by the friction of metal, and there was a brief tinnitus in his ears. He turned his head to look at Sally and opened his mouth to speak, only to find that he could not hear what she said at all. Roddy immediately made a shush gesture. Seeing Roddy's nervous look, Sally, who had been scared all the way, obediently shut her mouth. In fact, she also had tinnitus, and she could only vaguely hear what she said. Sally, who was worried about her hearing loss, soon found that the situation gradually improved in less than a minute. She looked up weakly and found that Roddy had jumped off the mining cart and was standing in front of it. He was in a daze. "Damn it!" Sally heard his undisguised curse, and thought that he was angry about the stones and wood blocking the way. She turned over and jumped down, whispering, "Shall we start moving now?" "Shush." But the answer she got was still Roddy's nervous order to be quiet. Sally looked around in confusion. Under the light of the torch, the environment here did not look as bad as she had imagined. Because the slope was not steep, the surroundings were open, and it looked like someone had dug a large open space. There were no obstacles, and it looked empty. The open space was about 400 or 500 square meters, and there was a looming cave at the end. In Sally's eyes, there was nothing unusual here. But in Roddy's eyes, he was simply unlucky. That was because this place was the transit station to the lair of the Chimera Beast. In the past, the guild players who came to challenge the Chimera Beast stopped their mining carts here and got down to fight. In their memory, the huge Chimera Beast was in the cave at the end of the far end. As long as they walked in front of the cave for 2 minutes, they could enter its lair. The reason why Roddy was so nervous at this time was because the loud noise just now was likely to have woken it up. Roddy could not hope that it was not here at this time, because he knew that it was better to think about how to get himself out of here as soon as possible than to believe in that probability. The obstacles in front of him were scattered, and the whole road ahead was completely blocked. He could not even climb over it. Fortunately, there were no huge stones or other heavy objects that he could not move. So, Roddy immediately ran to the pile of stones in front of the mining cart and waved his hand to ask Sally to help move these things. Roddy moved quickly, but did not dare to make too much noise. Sally was smart, and she also followed suit. The two began to move the stones in front of them in silence. But a sudden muffled sound made Roddy's mood instantly fall to the bottom of the valley. Thud! Thud! The sound of heavy footsteps echoed around, and the closed cave seemed to suddenly become even more silent because of the sound of footsteps. "What the hell happened to me? Don't stop. Hurry up and dig." Roddy had no other choice but to speed up the digging. There was no place to hide in the open space behind him, and a small tunnel had been dug under the ruins in front of him. If they dug it in time, the two should be able to get through. He looked back at the cave at the end of the light from the torch. The footsteps of the Chimera were slowly approaching. Roddy understood. If he faced it directly, he was afraid that he would be directly killed before he could even fight back. So he frantically moved the pile of stones in front of him, and it seemed that God did not give up on him. The two finally dug a hole that looked like they could go through. "Hurry up! Hurry up! Don't look back!" Roddy grabbed Sally and shoved her into the tunnel without saying anything. Sally also understood that she could not hesitate at this time. Her slender body immediately crawled through the narrow passageway under the pile of rocks and reached the other end. But when she turned around, she found that Roddy did not follow. At this moment, Sally felt as if a basin of ice water was poured over her head. She suppressed her panic and turned around to look at the narrow hole, only to find that Roddy's shoulders were too wide for him to squeeze through. F***ck F***ck F***ck. I miscalculated. Roddy thought that he could pass because he judged according to his previous reminder. But he forgot that he was much taller than before, and immediately felt that he had dug a hole for himself. Roar! The Chimera's roar was filled with the terrifying aura of the top of the food chain. The heavy footsteps even caused countless stones to fall from the pile of stones above Sally. Sally's eyes widened. She suddenly felt as if she was about to witness this man being torn to pieces by an unknown giant beast. An indescribable panic rose in her heart. But then, Sally suddenly thought of something. She suddenly touched her neck and took off the necklace, fiercely throwing it at Roddy. "Roddy, catch!" Roddy immediately understood Sally's intention. He accurately caught it and casually put it on his head. In the instant that the Chimera's gaze swept over, he softly chanted the incantation to activate the stealth spell. Oil Kala. Sally saw through the gap that Roddy had suddenly disappeared, and immediately understood that the incantation had taken effect. She took more than 10 steps back, leaning against the cold wall and looking at the pile of stones that was emitting some light. She held her breath, because very quickly, a huge black shadow gradually blocked out all the light. Roddy once again experienced the cold and suffocating feeling of approaching death. The chimera that crawled out of the cave in front of him was the terrifying creature that countless parties had come to kill. It was 4 meters tall and more than 10 meters long. It had a hard triangular head similar to a dragon, a pair of spiral goat horns, 4 limbs as thick as a giant lizard, and a tail that burned with frightening heat like a torch. Magical beasts in this era were rare species, not to mention this wild boss. There were less than 5 wild bosses in the entire Everton territory, and this one before him was the lowest level one. Even so, it was still in existence that Roddy could not fight against at the moment. This gigantic beast was like a hybrid of all kinds of creatures mixed together. It even looked a little funny, but no one would be able to laugh in the face of its anger. Roddy remembered that the first major guild to explore this place had sent a group of elite shield-bearers with a total level of at least 30. In the first 3 weeks, they almost depleted the guild's inventory due to the loss of equipment to repair the MT's resurrection. This creature could breathe fire, and its damage was so high that it could even kill a player instantly. Chapter 44. Roddy held his breath, narrowed his eyes, and tried to calm himself down. He muttered in his heart, "I can't kill this scumbag with 3 arrows in the past," to boost his courage, trying to prevent the spreading fear from eroding his brain. The chimera beast's huge head was swaying about 10 meters in front of him. It opened its mouth slightly and seemed to be in a very bad mood. Obviously, it was very dissatisfied with the breaking sound just now. Roddy could see the air twisting in its mouth, as if it was going to spit fire at any time. Its steps seemed slow, but in fact, each step covered at least 2 meters. When it came to the mining cart with its oppressive body, the light of the torch seemed to make it a little confused. It paused and looked at the torch with its head tilted. Just as Roddy swallowed, it opened its mouth without warning. Boom! Roddy did not dare to move. He let the hot gas blow horizontally in front of him without moving. At this moment, he had to be glad that he had found a suitable place. If he was 2 or 3 meters away, he would have become Qiu Shaoyun. His mind was filled with the scene of the martyrs sacrificing themselves in the language textbook. He stared at the flame in front of him, feeling that the air he breathed could burn his lungs. Fortunately, Roddy had put the torch in the torch slot above the mining cart. The extremely hot flame from the chimera beast's mouth almost instantly melted the torch and the iron rod into ashes, but did not burn the mining cart. Roddy glanced at the status bar that others could not see. His stealth skill would end in 10 seconds. Get out of here. Motherf asterisk cur, what are you waiting for? Roddy shouted in his heart. But after the chimera beast melted the torch, the surroundings instantly darkened, and he could not see what was in front of him. Fortunately, after a few seconds, the sound of the chimera beast's legs gradually faded away. Apparently, it was swaying back to the cave. Walala! With every step the gigantic chimera beast took, Roddy could hear the sound of something hitting the ground, but he did not dare to move. He did not even dare to breathe for 2 or 3 minutes after his stealth disappeared. After confirming that the chimera beast had returned to its cave, Roddy shifted his stiff body and touched his cheeks that were almost scalded by the hot air. He was glad that he was still alive. He turned his head and stretched out his hand towards the narrow hole that Sally had gone through. He whispered, "Sally?" A few seconds later, his fingertips that were suspended in the air touched Sally's cold palm. Roddy wanted to say something, but he found that the little girl suddenly clenched his fingers. In the darkness, Roddy heard a faint, sobbing voice from the other side. You're still alive?" It was obvious that Sally had mistakenly thought that Roddy was going to die after seeing the terrifying flames spit earlier. "I'm lucky. Of course, it's also thanks to your faster brain. That now is not the time to talk nonsense. We need to clear the obstacles, but be careful not to make any noise, or that big guy will come again." The surrounding light was too dim. Roddy looked back at the hole that he could no longer see clearly. There were only a few jumping flames left by the chimera beast's flame, and he could barely see the surroundings. At this time, it was obvious that a long night would bring trouble. It was better to leave as soon as possible. Hearing this, Sally immediately began to move the broken pieces from the other end. In the darkness, the two of them tacitly stopped talking. Like a foolish old man moving a mountain, they used their hands to slowly move the stone and wooden pieces that were blocking the tunnel. After 2 hours of moving without stopping, they finally cleared away the things between the tracks and opened up a gap for the mining cart to pass through. Both Roddy and Sally's hands were more or less injured, but at this time, he did not show any macho chauvinism and let Sally rest on the side, because they were pressed for time. If he did not do so, and if the chimera beast came out again, it was estimated that neither of them could bear the other's anger. After checking the mining cart, Roddy confirmed that it was not damaged except for being blackened by the flames. Then he was ready to leave with Sally. After igniting the new torch, he immediately found that there were a lot of shiny things on the ground. Roddy stopped and made a wait gesture to Sally, who was already sitting on the mining cart. He took a few steps to the things, reached out and picked them up, and was completely stunned. Aged chimera beast scales. Enchantment material: the older the chimera beast, the harder it gets, and the same goes for its scales. Roddy was no stranger to this kind of scale. As a former leather-making master, he was very familiar with the market for auxiliary materials in the production of leather armors and protective gear. He also understood the value of this scale in his hand. Before level 30, the most precious of all the materials for leather armors were the products dropped from wild bosses. Generally speaking, these materials were classified according to the classification of the grade, excellent green, which was 1 level higher than the white grade. If the chimera beast was killed, its skin would be classified as excellent blue, or even epic purple. These pieces of skin could be made into outer armor and inner armor according to their thickness, which could be sold at a sky-high price. And now, the scale in Roddy's hand was displayed as excellent blue. This sudden gain made his heart skip a beat. If a piece of equipment made from a green shard could have 130% of the attributes of a white-grade equipment, then a blue shard could achieve a 200% increase in attributes and also have a chance to add additional attributes to the equipment. Was it because it was 2 years ahead of time, and the chimera beast was shedding its scales? With that thought in mind, Roddy began to search for the remaining scales on the ground. His footsteps were as light as possible as he emptied the bag of bread, and like a gold miner, he frantically threw the fallen scales into the bag. He then found that many of the scales were not of high quality, with 70% of them being green, and some were even worthless white. Should I go into the cave to take a look? Roddy narrowed his eyes and looked at the nest of the chimera beast. He began to weigh the pros and cons. At that moment, the scales in Roddy's hands were not enough to make one piece of leather armor. If he continued to go deeper, he would certainly be able to gather one or even two sets of scales. But then he would have to face the risk of waking the chimera beast. But in Roddy's memory, the chimera beast would not wake up easily. It could even be said that when any monster was asleep, as long as they did not step into its absolute warning range or make a loud noise, no matter how low level it was, it would not wake it up. Originally, this was not enough for Roddy to go forward, but then he saw that the stealth skill of the mysterious necklace on his chest had come off cooldown. After thinking for a moment, he stepped into the cave. With the faint light from the distant torch, Roddy could clearly see where the shining scales were. The deeper he went, the more scales there were. When he went about 50 meters in, he suddenly saw a large patch of thick scales on the ground. That was definitely a pleasant surprise. The chimera beast had probably moved its body because of the itch when it was shedding its scales. Roddy also found that there were even scales marked with the word purple on it. As if he had found a mountain of treasures, Roddy threw out all the low-grade scales from the bag. He then picked out a large pile of scales that were of excellent quality. After everything was done, he carefully felt his way back along the side of the rock wall. The light here was extremely dim, and he could only move forward with his sense of touch. Just as he was about to walk out of the cave, his foot suddenly tripped on something. Roddy stopped abruptly, his raised foot hovering in midair. He looked down, but could only see an extremely blurry human silhouette. It looked like a dead person. When Roddy walked in, he did not notice this guy. At this moment, his foot was placed on the guy's head. Although he did not step on it, the touch told Roddy that the guy under his foot had become a rotten skeleton. Seeing this, Roddy bent down and began to loot corpses as a player was best at. In the past few years in the game, Roddy had dealt with this kind of corpse countless times. Even now, even in the real world, he did not feel any discomfort when he touched the corpse, even though the smell had disappeared. The clothes were rotten and would break at the slightest touch. With just a little force, Roddy's chest caved in. From the burnt and incomplete clothes, for the time being, Roddy judged that this unlucky guy had died under the flames of the chimera beast. Obviously, the corpses in this kind of place were most likely miners. Without any hope, Roddy did not expect to find anything. However, he was careful and finally found a ring on the finger bone that was so fine that it was unrecognizable. It was a little unexpected, but he was not interested in looking at the displayed attribute. Stepping over the corpse, Roddy quickly rushed to the mining cart. After throwing a bag full of scales onto the cart, he immediately pushed it and began to run. "Get down!" The wheels of the mining cart began to turn, and the noise immediately filled the cave. Roddy knew that he had to leave immediately. Otherwise, the chimera beast, which was not yet asleep, would rush over at a faster speed. The starting section of the tunnel was relatively flat, so even if Roddy pushed the cart like crazy, the speed of the entire mining cart did not increase. Bang! The sudden muffled sound made Roddy realize that the big animal had woken up and was rushing over. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him. When he turned his head, he was horrified to find that the chimera beast had appeared at the entrance of the cave. Oel Kala. Regardless of whether it was useful or not, Roddy immediately activated his stealth skill and disappeared behind the mining cart. Sally, who was in the mining cart, did not show up because she had lowered her body. The chimera beast in the distance had poor eyesight. After appearing angrily, The first thing it noticed was a mining cart that was inexplicably moving into the distance. The chimera beast did not seem to have the intelligence to figure out why the obstacle had disappeared. Its shuttle-shaped head looked at the strange scene in front of it in confusion, and it froze in place for more than 3 seconds. Chapter 45. The chimera beast hesitated for 3 seconds before it finally made up its mind. It dashed towards the mining cart with sparks flying out of its mouth. At that moment, the mining cart had finally passed the gentle slope and entered the acceleration stage. Rhodey, who was stealthily moving, jumped onto the mining cart without looking back. He then pushed Sally into the cart. Sally's body stiffened as she fell to the ground. She did not understand why Rhodey was doing this, but before she could ask any questions, a deafening roar accompanied by an orange light instantly filled her entire field of vision. The chimera beast's mouth suddenly spewed out scorching flames, but because the mining cart was so fast, the flames could not catch up with the cart. But the aftermath of the impact still blew over the mining cart, making Roddy's hair and back feel an indescribable heat. Sally instinctively closed her eyes, but she also understood why Roddy threw her down. If she had just sat there like a fool, perhaps her whole face would have been burned by now. The chimera beast could no longer catch up with the mining cart, so it could only watch the cart disappear from its sight. In the end, it roared angrily and helplessly, turned around and returned to its cave. In the mining cart, Roddy gasped and climbed up from Sally. "Damn it! This is too scary. I will come back sooner or later to kill you." He cursed because he was really scared. When he came back to his senses, he found that Sally was blushing under him. He immediately tried to get up, but his hand, which he stretched out to support himself, was pressed on Sally's chest because of the perfect bump of the mining cart. Even though Roddy asked her to tighten the cloth as much as possible, it could not hide the fact that she was well developed. Roddy felt as if he was holding a ball of something that would slip away at any time. When he came to his senses, Roddy suddenly remembered what he had touched. He suddenly raised his hand, but his movement was so big that he almost fell out of the cart. In front of him, Sally, who had just sat up, silently clasped her hands over her chest and lowered her head in silence. The atmosphere suddenly seemed to freeze. That bastard. Roddy felt that he was really unlucky. He had just escaped from the bottom of the monster, and now Sally probably wanted to kill him. He looked at the girl curled up in the dark and swallowed hard. She did not seem to want to pursue the matter, so he felt a little relieved. "I'm such an unlucky child. I'll just take it one step at a time." The mining cart continued to move forward. Rhodey no longer thought about those messy things. He raised his head vigilantly and stared at the front with his hand on the brake lever. But luck was good. After half an hour, the mining cart finally came to the end of the tunnel, the southern end of the Endel Mountains. The air in the tunnel was so cold that Sally, who walked out of the cave, felt a lot warmer outside. She jumped out of the mining cart and seemed to have not recovered from the chest attack incident. Her feelings were very subtle. Was she angry? Sally, who had always been clear-headed, certainly knew that Roddy did not do it on purpose, so she was angry, but not too much hatred. But what scared her the most was, when Roddy touched her chest just now, Sally surprisingly found that she did not seem to have much disgust in her heart. This feeling made Sally a little flustered. For a moment, she did not even know how to continue to communicate with Roddy. In fact, when Roddy was concentrating on the front, Sally's eyes did not leave him. "Why can't I control my eyes?" The more Sally thought about it, the more she felt that she seemed to have fallen into a strange circle. She simply stopped talking and followed Roddy. Roddy, who was walking in front, did not notice the change in Sally. He was looking at the valuable harvest in his backpack and secretly planning how to strengthen his attribute. In the entire backpack, there were more than 20 scales with purple attributes, and 179 scales with blue attributes. According to Roddy's estimation, these scales could be made into 2 sets of full-body leather armor, and the attributes would definitely be the best at the current level. Thinking back to when he was level 4, he was simply wearing rags. Not to mention blue equipment. Even if there was a green equipment, he would be happy. But now? If he relied on his own craftsmanship, the equipment made from these things would definitely be a mix of blue and purple. Even if the equipment was marked as level 4, the overall attributes plus the added value would definitely be better than level 8 green equipment. The first guild that went to hunt the Chimera probably made a lot of money because of these scales. Thinking back carefully, Roddy did remember seeing a situation where a large number of Chimera scales appeared in the auction house. It seemed that Roddy had picked up this bargain. It had to be said that every time he was unlucky, his luck was not bad. Turning his gaze to another item, Roddy looked at the ring he found on the skeleton and slightly raised his eyebrows. Dusty Ring Quest item unique strength plus 2 vitality plus 1 level requirement. 5-inch. The gem above the base seems to be missing. It turned out to be a quest item. Roddy was a little surprised, but then he felt relieved. There were many quests that started with an item picked up. He himself had done no less than 100 similar quests, but these things were like buying a lottery. If you were lucky and got an epic quest chain, you would definitely make a lot of money, but if you were unlucky... Roddy had seen unlucky people who spent nearly 10,000 gold coins on a quest chain, only to end up with a useless pet. The current ring could only be equipped and triggered when he reached level 5, so Roddy put it on his finger to prevent it from being lost. Unexpectedly, the ring was extremely thin and could only be worn on his little finger. Before reaching level 5, equipment would not receive any attribute bonuses, so at this time, Roddy still maintained the naked attribute of level 4. After exiting the tunnel, the two of them were halfway up the mine. There were trees all around them, and it looked like birds were singing and flowers were fragrant. Because it was early in the morning, the temperature at first was still acceptable, but after a while it felt a little cold. But when the sun shone on the land, the coldness disappeared. Walking with tired steps, Sally felt that the distance she had walked in these few days was more than the distance she had walked in her entire life. Even now, her mind still felt a little unreal. When the two of them finally arrived at a hill with a wide view, Sally raised her head and looked into the distance and was stunned. In her field of vision, the huge outline of Hollier City appeared. We really did it? Although Roddy had already told her about the result, when she really saw the scene before her, the shock in her heart was still indescribable. But what followed was a sudden panic. Sally's originally rational thinking seemed to have become extremely emotional in the past few days. She followed behind Roddy, raised her head and looked at his back that persisted after traveling day and night, and inexplicably felt a sense of loss in her heart. In just a few days, this stranger in front of her seemed to have formed an indescribable tacit understanding with her and a kind of strange friendship. Only after experiencing the dangerous situation herself, Sally could truly understand how much risk he had taken to save her. But after doing so much, he didn't make any extra requests. Could it really be like what he said? Everything he did was just so that this country would not be destroyed by a bunch of bastards in the future? Regardless of whether what Roddy said was true or not, Sally felt a heavy burden at that moment. Unlike the other nobles that she had come into contact with, Roddy didn't seem to like to save the country and such, but everything he did was obviously for this goal. That inexplicable firmness and steadiness would sometimes become the charm in the eyes of others. Roddy, after returning to Hollier, where will you go? In the end, she still asked this question softly. Roddy, who was carrying a backpack, seemed to have already known the answer. He shook his head and said, after confirming that you have safely entered the city, I still have some things to do and will stay here for a few days. But before I leave, I should probably see you again. Really? Sally raised her eyebrows. There was some inexplicable emotions in her heart because of Roddy's departure. However, the other party's words made the knot in her heart dissipate for no reason. Pay attention to your own safety. Even if Rose Cross can give you protection, you still have to be careful of Francis's determination to fight to the death. When people really abandon their bottom line, they are often more terrifying than you think. Roddy tightened his backpack, turned his head and suddenly asked, "Are we considered friends now?" Sally was already used to him asking such inexplicable questions. She nodded without hesitation and said, "Why not?" Then she saw Roddy's gaze lift a little, as if he was looking at the top of her head in a daze. It was as if he saw something new above her head. Sally raised her head and found that she could only see the green branches and the blue sky. She did not know that Roddy was currently checking her character status. The previous inquiry was similar to the form of, "Add a private friend." In the game, only private friends could carefully check each other's character status. Level, equipment, attributes, and title. If it was just a normal friend, only the level and title could be seen. If it was a stranger, when the distance was close, the approximate level range could be shown. At this time, Roddy saw that Sally's level was 7. This was not a low level, probably due to her noble background. Although her level was higher than Roddy's, because she was a female NPC in the game, her attributes of strength and constitution were not comparable to his. However, her intelligence and spirit were particularly outstanding. Roddy slightly frowned. Could it be that the children of the Lucifron family were all suitable for the extremely rare magic class? After all, players could choose their own path in the future. However, in terms of the quality of the population in the Kingdom of Karen, even among the nobles, the number of people who could eventually become a magic class was extremely low. Duke Lucifron only had these 2 children, and both of them had the talent to become a magic class. This in itself was extremely rare. Francis was already an elementalist, while Sally's talent seemed to be. Was she a priest under the Rose Cross faction? However, none of these things could explain how she could resist the poison of the poisonous scorpion, because it was impossible for a priest to use a skill like detoxify. Roddy was puzzled. He turned his eyes to Sally's face and saw her looking at him in confusion. He immediately touched his pocket and took out all the voodoo dice he found in the orc camp and gave them to her. "I suddenly thought of something that might be useful to you." Since it was an item that increased intelligence and spirit, Roddy just made the best use of it. He was still a player, but he did not know that Sally was even more confused at this time. After all, who would want these things that only the orc witch doctors would use? Although Sally stretched out her hand to take it, she did not know why Roddy said that. "This is a spoil of war I obtained from the orcs. It belonged to an orc shaman. How should I put it? The owner of this may be the biggest threat to the kingdom in the future. If one day you feel that you can't fight anymore, I hope this will remind you of what I said today." Roddy originally wanted to make up an excuse to let her keep it, but when he said it, it became a solemn entrustment. Sally was a little stunned for a moment. When she saw Roddy turn around and continue walking, she realized that the thing in her hand might not be as simple as it looked. Chapter 46. At noon, outside the city of Hollier. Speaking of which, Francis had sent a lot of cavalrymen outside the city in an attempt to make a final struggle. However, for the largest city in the territory of Ifta, unless there were more than 1,000 cavalrymen, it would be difficult to intercept and inspect everyone who entered the city. They did not dare to intercept at the city gate because Francis did not have the guts and power to do so. Therefore, Roddy easily led Sally around a few patrols and leisurely walked into the city that had long been destroyed in his memory. The scene of the city falling and the flames of war burning the sky was still vivid in his mind. However, as far as the eye could see, the peaceful scene formed a strong contrast with his memory. He looked up at the city wall that was more than 10 meters high and could not help but feel a little emotional. Sally thought that this was the surprise he felt when he first came to this magnificent city. She did not expect that this guy was thinking about the players' debate about strengthening the city's defense facilities. Recalling the content in his mind and comparing it with what he was seeing now, he felt that if he was in charge of the defense construction, it would be much more efficient. Walking in the first important city in the newbie area, Roddy's understanding of this place was far deeper than Sally had imagined. As the capital of EFTA territory, it was the political and economic center of the northwest of the empire. It had the largest auction house, the most blacksmith shops, and the most precious raw materials. It could be said that it had everything. However, for Rhodey at that moment, coming to Hollier City was not very suitable. According to the level distribution, border villages such as Norland Village, Vic Village, and Fanks Village belonged to the activity area of level 1 to 5 players. After that, players would receive a series of missions and go to areas such as Kegtown to level up from level 5 to 10. After reaching level 10, they would change their class and go to fortresses and cities according to the recommendations of their class mentors. Among them, Fort Conceaton was a quest area that only players with a total level of 10 to 15 could receive. As for Hollier, as the highest level city, most of the quests could only be received by players with a total level of 20 and above. In other words, it was very difficult for Roddy to gain any benefits in Hollier City. Although there were some low-level quests available, they were not of much help to him. Unknowingly, he walked into the city, and this tortuous journey was coming to an end. Although there was no banquet in the world that lasted forever, Roddy thought for a while and felt that this great escape was really not a banquet. Finally, he stopped and turned around. He whispered to Sally as usual, "The disguise on your body can be wiped off with hot water, but the color of your hair needs to be soaked for a period of time. Actually, this is all I can do." Roddy wanted to say something appropriate, but in the end, he didn't say anything else. He scratched his head, and for some reason, he didn't dare to look Sally in the eye. "And I understand. Also, you said that you would meet me one last time before you leave?" Sally tried hard to control her emotions. Her lips trembled slightly, but there was nothing strange in her words. Roddy nodded. He just nodded, but did not say when or where. Without waiting for Sally to say anything else, he took a step back and smiled at the girl who was alone so far away from home for the first time. He whispered, "I have fulfilled my duty. Francis did not kill you. Now it's up to you." Sally wanted to say something, but at this time, someone accidentally bumped her shoulder. The thin girl staggered a step, and when she looked up again, she found that Roddy was no longer in front of her. An unconcealable sense of loss filled her heart in an instant. Sally looked around helplessly, trying to find the figure that could bring her a sense of security. In the end, she saw a pure white roof not far away. That was the monastery of the Rose Cross Temple, the largest religious institution in Hollier City. Sally took a deep breath, recalling the suffering and danger she and Roddy had suffered along the way, and thinking of old Jerson and the others who were destined to die, her face gradually became gloomy. Fingers clenched tightly, the absolutely rational and confident Sally seemed to have reappeared at this moment. Gently taking off her hood, Sally walked straight to the monastery of the Rose Cross. She stopped in front of the tall white temple church, gently washed away the disguise on her face with the water from the wishing pool, and then under the surprised gaze of the guards, she walked to the back hall that only the clergyman of the monastery could enter. Walking on another street, Roddy felt a little melancholy. But this feeling was similar to when he parted with his instructor after more than 10 days of military training when he was a child. He felt a little sad in his heart, but not too much. The illusion of destined to be alone for life was sometimes not a joke. The rational side of Roddy was so strong that the original emotional side of his brain was suppressed to almost nothing within 5 or 6 minutes after Sally left. Thinking back to the original plan, Roddy felt that he had achieved the basic goal of saving Sally. Although he accompanied her on such a thrilling journey, the harvest was really rich. After being a player for so many years, the most profound thing he understood was that it is better to rely on yourself than on others. To be honest, he did not put all his hopes on Sally. The equipment that Roddy wanted to make was a full set, and he needed an unusually large number of Chimera Beast scales. He understood that if he casually gave these precious materials to those unreliable leathersmiths, he would definitely become the focus of the city. So, he had to complete these steps by himself. Fortunately, Roddy, who used to be a leathersmith, did not have a headache. His previous title was Master Leather, so this kind of work was a piece of cake. This was one of Roddy's current advantages. Although his secondary profession did not shine, but because of his memory, it was almost equivalent to retaining most of the standard of the ranger. So, after finding a secluded inn, Roddy directly threw 15 silver coins to the innkeeper, directly shut himself in the room, and silently began his leather armor crafting. Once Roddy immersed himself in this state of work, it was as if he had returned to the days of monotonous labor in order to earn a living. For 15 consecutive days, Roddy almost did not leave the room more than a few times, even eating 3 meals a day in the room. In between, he sent a letter to Norland Village, which could be considered as a report to the fellows who had been comrades for a few days that he was safe. But the letter did not contain any extra information, not even mentioning his return date. And in these 15 days there were also a few incidents that happened in Hollier. The first incident happened on the second day after Roddy shut himself in the inn. The guards of the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral changed their usual state of quietly guarding the surroundings of the church. Suddenly, hundreds of Holy Cathedral guards were dispatched, holding blessings in their hands. They stood by the side of the main road of Hollier, and opened up a road directly to the city square. And the person who appeared after that caused even more nobles in the city to move out, not daring to be the slightest bit negligent. Bishop Benjamin walked out of the church, personally came to the city square, and gave an impassioned speech here this year for the second time. His reputation in the entire northwest of the kingdom was so high that wherever he walked, there would be believers kneeling and kissing. And what no one expected was that the bishop who was supposed to preach the doctrine this autumn actually brought forward the ceremony, and at the end of the speech personally announced, "The daughter of the Dukes of Angmar, Sally Lucifron, was now selected by the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral in Hollier." Lucifron had now become the new generation's priest candidate chosen by the Rose-Cross Church in Hollier City. This was explosive news for the nobles and commoners of Hollier, because the Holy Cathedral had always only chosen nuns or friars. To put it bluntly, it was a young man with a talent for holy art. Previously, it was almost certain that Sally would enter the cathedral, but no one thought that she would be so high-profile. Priest was the level above monk. In a sense, this level was the starting position of a regular clergyman. The leap from monk to priest was very difficult. It could even be said to be 1 in 100. Many people could only silently devote their loyalty to the Holy Cathedral for their entire lives without being able to take a step further. But now that the bishop suddenly announced that Sally had become a priest candidate, it meant that her position in the Rose-Cross would definitely be unprecedented in the future. With the protection of the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral, Sally's status in the Lucifron family was instantly on par with that of her brother, who was about to become an elementalist, or even slightly higher. And the deterrence brought about by this was one of the important bargaining chips in a tug-of-war with the other party in the future. and at this point, Sally also had the right to directly enter the internal system of the Holy Cathedral to study and advance. Chapter 47. In an era where communication was very underdeveloped, it would take a lot of manpower for any nobleman to keep their information up to date. In a situation where manpower was limited, how to balance the input of such resources became a subject of study for the nobleman. From a common point of view, Francis should be called a wise nobleman. In order to intercept Sally, he arranged most of his men to go to the 7 or 8 villages on the outskirts of Hollier, and at the same time, he rushed back to the ducal palace as fast as he could. As long as he arrived first, he could wait for his sister's arrival and comfortably grasp all the initiative to make all the necessary preparations. Such a decision was not a problem in anyone's eyes. Anyone who rode on a horse on the plains would be patrolled by Francis's men. If it was through the forest, how could it outrun the warm-blooded horse he was riding? Unless Sally could fly in the sky, Francis did not think that there was any way for Sally to bypass his surveillance and return to Hollier. After making so many moves, Francis could be said to be very calm. So, at noon, when he appeared outside the city gate, he could not help but let out a sigh of relief and showed a relaxed smile. Imagining his sister being thrown into the wilderness and running helplessly, Francis rode into the city with his head held high. Because of the speed of the journey these few days, the people who were supposed to be in charge of collecting information did not have time to report to him anything about Hollier. But Francis was not in a hurry. Noblemen should have the elegance of noblemen. He planned to listen to his men's report after returning to the mansion. Of course, another important reason was Francis had never run such a long distance before. It was a little painful. After riding for 3 days straight, his physical strength was severely depleted, and he almost couldn't hold on anymore. It could be said that he had suffered a lot. The inside of his thighs was abraded by the saddle, and the pain in his balls was so painful that the corner of his mouth twitched. But for the elegance of noblemen, Francis did not dare to choose to walk as soon as he entered the city. Because once he got off the horse, it was estimated that his walking posture would be as ridiculous as a turtle. So the Count straightened his back all the way back to the ducal palace. When the mansion gate behind him closed and the old butler, Alpha, came out to greet him, he let out a sigh of relief and climbed down from the horse's back stiffly. Phew! Letting out a sigh of relief, Francis raised his head and said to the old steward in a good mood, "Alpha, I don't want to ride a fast horse this time. It's so uncomfortable. Hey, young master, your return time is much earlier than expected." "Yeah, something happened. The border hasn't been peaceful recently. Sally and I went our separate ways. She's behind me, so she probably hasn't arrived yet." This was the reason that Francis had thought of a long time ago. When Francis said it, his expression was very natural. Butler Alpha's expression didn't change much. He just smiled and waved his hand to ask the servants to help the young Count up. But after a few steps, just as Francis was about to return to the mansion, the butler suddenly said, "Is it, young master and young lady, having a competition again?" "Competition?" Francis raised his eyebrows. Thinking back to the past when he and Sally were competing, perhaps Alpha still thought that Francis and Sally were competing. But this reason seemed to be very logical, so Francis nodded and said, "You can say that. I'm afraid this time, she's going to lose." The young Count's smile was very confident and bright. But Alpha didn't say anything else. He just nodded, as if he always had the same expression. Then he turned around and went to arrange the night. With the help of the servant, Francis returned to his bedroom. The first thing he did was to take a hot bath. After venting his lust in the bathtub with the plump maid he had taken when he was 15 years old, Francis felt extremely good because of the stimulation of his body, and he felt extremely comfortable. Sally was going to die. The next thing he needed to do was to wait for his father to pass the title to him. Francis wanted to laugh out loud, but his crotch was slightly pulled because of the excessive movement just now. This kind of pain made him very uncomfortable. So now he was lying on the bed with all 4 limbs spread out, and the maid carefully applied the ointment for him. In his mind, all he could think about was the glorious scene after he took control of the territory. As an old noble family, the Lucifron family's power network almost covered half of the empire. He had a group of aunts and uncles, all of whom were nobles who were lords of other territories. If he raised his army, the whole kingdom would tremble in fear of the powerful power of his family. When he thought of how those arrogant royals would submit in front of him, the corner of Francis' mouth slightly curled up. "Young master, what makes you so happy?" "There are a lot of happy things, such as it's a little bigger." Francis was in a good mood. He reached out to pinch the maid's hand and teased her, which made her pout coquettishly. The maid's face made him want to vent his desire again. But after thinking that he still had things to do, he calmed down and got up to ask the servants to report the latest news. "Young master, don't you want to rest a little longer?" "No, I want to see how long it will take for my sister to come back," Francis replied casually. He reached out to adjust the collar of his white shirt, and his tone became calm again. "Miss Sally?" The maid got up from the bed and put on her dress again. She answered strangely, "Miss, didn't she come back?" "She can't come back." "Huh." Francis's expression suddenly froze. It seemed that after a few seconds, he realized that there was something wrong with the maid's words. His action of adjusting his sleeves stopped in mid-air. What did you say? She came back?" "Yesterday, Bishop Benjamin held a Rose Cross Temple speech and blessing ceremony in the square. Miss Sally was announced as the new candidate priest." "Young master, you just came back, I'm afraid you don't know?" "Miss, Young master." "Young master?" The maid who was talking suddenly noticed that Francis's expression seemed to be a little strange, and her voice became hesitant. You mean, Sally has become a candidate priest?" "I mean, did she attend the ceremony yesterday?" Although Francis didn't believe that it was possible, he still wanted to confirm the news. To his relief, the maidservant shook her head. "That's right. The Rose Cross suddenly went crazy. Sally couldn't come back at all." He thought in his heart. "I didn't go to the scene, but I heard that Bishop Benjamin personally performed the blessing ceremony for Miss Sally. I think Miss should have already returned." The atmosphere in the bedroom suddenly froze for a moment. As an elementalist, Francis stood rooted to the ground as if he had been struck by lightning. The air was instantly filled with drifting magical elements. The maid standing at the side felt as if the young master in front of her was suddenly shrouded by a ball of hot flame. Francis turned his head and blinked his eyes. Looking at the woman in front of him, he tilted his head slightly and opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something. But after a few seconds, he couldn't say anything. "Sally didn't die, Sally escaped. Not only did she escape, but also rushed back to Hollier City before me. Now, she actually became a candidate priest? Where's my cavalry? Where's the interception team? Where's the warning that I arranged along the way?" As if a bucket of cold water was poured on his head, an unprecedented sense of frustration instantly enveloped Francis. Previously, his strategy of letting the wolf cavalry bring a bad feeling to Sally now seemed to be completely used on him. His brain tried to integrate the information. Francis reached out and grabbed the maid's wrist, asking in a low voice, "You mean, you only heard these things, and she didn't return to the ducal palace?" Yes, young master. It seems that Miss has been resting in the Rose Cross Monastery these days, and didn't return to the mansion." The maid felt that her arm was about to be broken by him, and immediately answered Francis's question as fast as possible. And this answer finally made Francis heave a sigh of relief, because he found that he still had room to fight. Although Sally entered the Holy Cathedral, she couldn't use the power of the Holy Cathedral to fight against him at present. In other words, Sally now had enough defense, but not enough offense. But Francis was just the opposite, because he still had the initiative. After thinking about this, Francis suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. After relaxing his mind, he took a few steps back and sat back on the bed. This movement made him howl like a pig being slaughtered. Chapter 48. As for how Francis and Sally would start a new round of confrontation with the resources in their hands, Roddy, as the initiator of the whole incident, did not care at all. His mind was completely focused on the equipment that was gradually being made in the dark hotel room. In order not to attract attention, he spent money to hire people to forge various metal parts mixed with mithril from the 4 blacksmiths, while he dealt with the scales himself. After the parts were completed, he assembled and sewed all the parts himself. Although the characteristics of the scales of the Chimera beast were unknown to ordinary people, in the eyes of the master leatherworker Roddy, he had been doing similar work day and night for more than 2 years. Everything was a piece of cake for him. The consumption of materials was kept to a minimum, and the effect was the best. On the 15th day after he parted with Sally, Roddy finally finished making all the equipment. Looking at the large pile of equipment in front of him with satisfaction, Roddy took a deep breath. As a technological geek, perhaps only at this moment could he have the most sense of value in his heart. And these pieces of equipment were the first set of assets since his rebirth. There were a total of 7 pieces of leather armor made from the scales of the Chimera beast, including shoulder pads, breastplate, belt, wrist guards, leggings, gloves, and leather boot. All of them were made from scales of above blue quality. Not only were the main materials precious, but the supplementary materials were also very valuable. They were all high-end goods that had been processed with magic or strengthened by potions. Although the items were only level 4, because the materials themselves were dropped by a level 20 Chimera beast, the attributes had reached the limit of level 4 equipment. 5 of the pieces of equipment were blue, while the gloves and leather boots had reached purple epic quality. Of course, the so-called epic quality was only the name of the equipment's level. Most of the equipment that could be called epic was marked for advanced professions and above level 50. But even so, to be able to obtain purple epic quality equipment at level 4, the attribute bonus would definitely be an astronomical figure for the players. At this moment, fluorescent words flashed in front of Roddy's eyes. Stalker's breastplate superior leather armor location. Chest level requirement. 4127 armor strength plus 11 vitality plus 13 agility plus 8 set part 1/6. The Stalker's pauldrons, Stalker's bracers, Stalker's belt, and Stalker's leg guards all had similar attribute. They all increased strength, constitution, and agility. If the breastplate was used as the base, then the pauldron's attributes would be 70% of the breastplate. Wrist guards 30%, belt 30%, leg guards 80%, boots 60%, gloves 30%. However, Roddy's Stalker gloves and leather boots were both purple-grade equipment. Their attributes were 30% higher than blue-grade equipment, and they came with 2 special effects. The boots increased movement speed by 5%, while the gloves increased critical rate by 1% and hit rate by 1%. It could be said that this set of equipment directly increased Roddy's attributes by several times. The entire set of Stalker armor gave Roddy 45 points of strength, 58 points of vitality, and 35 points of agility. At the same time, in addition to the 1% critical hit rate and 5% movement speed, the set also added 3 more attributes: 2/7, armor plus 1504/7, constitution plus 107/7. Attacks have a certain chance of additional fire damage according to his previous experience in the game. Roddy's current set of equipment was already comparable to a level 8 green-grade equipment. Including the set effect, it was equivalent to a full set of level 15 green-grade equipment, expensive materials, exquisite craftsmanship, and the set effect because the main material was the Chimera's scales. All these factors made Roddy's strength more than triple in an instant. After equipping the equipment one by one, Roddy called out the character status bar. He was satisfied to see the huge change in his attributes. Frowny Face Legion Soldier, a level 4 strength 22, plus 45, agility 11, plus 35, spirit 9 vitality 18, plus 68, intelligence 8. His health points instantly increased from the original point to a terrifying number. He could be called a bull among those of the same level. Because the Chimera's defense and health points were amazing, the set made from its scales also retained these characteristics. Even the armor was at the same level as green metal light armor. Even Roddy himself had not expected the effects to be so shocking. After all, the increase in basic attributes before his class change at level 10 was simply too slow. Now that he thought about it, it was within his expectations that a full set of top-tier equipment would increase his basic attributes by several times. He estimated that wearing this set of equipment until level 10 should not be a problem for him to change profession. After adjusting the leather belt, Roddy reached out and picked up another piece of equipment he made. This was not for himself, but specially prepared for Sally. In the assassination incident caused by the Duke's title, even if Sally had escaped, the threat of Francis was still there. To solve this problem, the solution Roddy could think of was very simple: kill the other party. But now was not the time. He planned to use a period of time to increase his strength and influence, but first of all, he had to ensure that Sally continued to live. Although the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral was powerful enough, no one could guarantee that Francis would not do something desperate. So, Roddy carefully selected the thinner scales of the Chimera, soaked the originally thick scales in a potion, and finally sewed it into a light blue soft armor shirt. It felt similar to ordinary cloth clothing, and was even softer to the touch. However, only Roddy knew how many materials were used to make the clothes. It could be said that the total cost of the materials used to make the Stalker's 7 sets was only equal to the cost of one set of soft armor. Refined soft scale inner armor, superior leather armor position. Chest level requirement: 4180 armor vitality plus 65 special effect. When attacked, there is a certain probability of reducing 40 damage. Although this equipment was marked as a leather armor, it could be worn as a cloth. It was not suitable for Sally to wear leather armor every day in the monastery of the Rose Holy Cathedral. With this soft armor lining, her HP could be more than doubled, and it could almost completely reduce the damage of a level 5 NPC. Roddy believed that with this equipment, Sally's life would not be too much of a concern. Letting out a satisfied breath, Roddy got up and packed up the remaining materials, took all his belongings and left the inn. Because the Stalker set was unusually sharp and full of streamlined beauty, Roddy put on a cloak in order not to attract too much attention. His weapons also needed to be upgraded, but Roddy did not go to the blacksmith shop to buy or make them directly. He had his own plans. Previously, Roddy had agreed to meet up with Sally one last time before leaving, and he had planned to hand over the finished clothes to her. However, because he had been working day and night to produce the equipment, he was somewhat behind on the news. He still needed some information to confirm the current situation. So, after leaving the hotel, Roddy went straight to the well-informed Cambay district where crooks and honest folk mixed together. At the same time, in the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral, Sally seemed a little depressed. To the players, the Rose-Cross sect was a very powerful force. It was hard to get close to and could not be provoked. Countless people wanted to enter this organization because the treatment it provided to the insiders was far better than what other forces of the same level could offer. On this continent, the Rose-Cross sect was similar to the religious forces of other countries. It had an extremely strict hierarchy. In the kingdom of Karen, it had existed for a long time. To a certain extent, it could even affect the fate of the kingdom. And now, Sally was in the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral in Hollier City, becoming a member of this huge religious organization. The monastery where the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral was located was a quiet place in the city. There were no fortress-like tall and dangerous walls. The noisy street was only a street away from the monastery, but it seemed to have separated the world from the outside world. The ground inside the monastery was paved with cold raw stones. When the sun shone on it, it would light up with a crystal light. The atmosphere here was quiet and solemn. When one looked up, there seemed to be something invisible that suppressed the restlessness in one's heart. Sally stood in the corridor of the temple, looking up at the neat and tidy dome above her head. She felt an inexplicable pressure in her heart. Being inside the holy cathedral, she was not as calm as she looked. In order to make Francis temporarily give up on his attack, Sally chose this risky move. But the price was also very obvious. Becoming a priest not only meant that she could not marry for the rest of her life, but more importantly, she could only be absolutely loyal to the Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral. The Rose-Cross Holy Cathedral was like a solid shield. While it ensured Sally's safety, it also prevented her from using too many external forces to deal with Francis. The result of this was another stalemate between the siblings. Francis did not make a move in the ducal palace, and Sally refused to go out in the monastery of the Holy Cathedral. The Lucifron family, which seemed to be normal to ordinary people, had actually entered a kind of calm before the storm. But the two people involved were thinking hard about how to smoothly break this stalemate. Leaving here means that you may encounter unexpected attacks at any time. Only in the Holy Cathedral can you guarantee your safety. Sally, do you understand? These were the words that Bishop Benjamin left for Sally. The bishop, who was over 50 years old, was knowledgeable and pious. In the eyes of the believers, he was always a silent and wise man. 15 days ago, it was this bishop who agreed to Sally's request and made her a candidate priest. The reason might not be just because of her identity as Duke's daughter, but as for the specific reason, it seemed that even Sally herself did not know. Walking through the empty and silent corridor, when unfamiliar believers or priests walked past her, the cold atmosphere still filled the air. Sally's eyes were a little gloomy, and she was in a bad mood. She was wearing the special dark blue robe of a candidate. Her mind was trying to recall the teachings that she recited yesterday. But after thinking for a long time, she could not get rid of that figure that she could not get out of her mind. The battle half a month ago had left an eternal mark on her soul. His calmness in the battle against the orcs, his decisiveness in killing the mythical beasts in the silent forest, his decisiveness in handing over the necklace to her in the face of Francis, and his nervousness in the face of the chimera. He grabbed her arm and lifted her skirt to check her wound. She was so scared that she fell to the ground because she thought that he was a ghost. He pressed her chest in the mining cart. She could not tell what kind of emotion it was, but Sally had to admit that she might not be able to get rid of the influence of this figure for a long time. Chapter 49. At the end of the day, Sally was only a 16-year-old girl. No matter what she had experienced in the past, with her age, she was still able to think about things that were more emotional. The little girl's imagination would occasionally simulate some sad scenes in her mind. Would he give up this promise because he couldn't enter the Rosary Cross Temple? Could he have already left Hollier City? Worried about personal gains and losses, Sally did not sleep well for the past few days. Speaking of which, her ability was indeed much stronger than Rhodey had imagined. In just 15 days, she had already made temporary contact with the men she had buried in the depths of Hollier, which allowed her to not be completely passive when facing Francis. But Sally also understood that she could not blatantly send people to look for Roddy. Otherwise, Francis, who had been eyeing her for a long time, would probably find trouble with Roddy. The only thing she could do was to wait here silently. At least before she could confirm Francis's plan and whereabouts, she could not step out of the cathedral. Would he come? Unknowingly, when she walked to the main hall of the cathedral, Sally would always look up at the colorful window. She could not help but clench her fingers and sigh softly. It was the 16th day. Today he would not come either. Thinking so, she was about to turn around and leave when she heard a conversation in front of the main hall. This adventurer has important news to report to Bishop Benjamin. He has Priest Nilda's token in his hands. Priest Nilda? Didn't he already? So it's urgent. We need to inform the bishop immediately. It sounded like the guards outside the cathedral had brought an adventurer to the porch of the monastery, and he was going to meet Bishop Benjamin. Sally turned around and raised her eyebrows in confusion. She remembered the name, Priest Nilda. He was Bishop Benjamin's favorite student. She had met him half a year ago. Later, she heard that he had mysteriously disappeared after a mission outside the city. At that time, the Holy Cathedral had sent many people to investigate, but in the end, they returned with no result. Forget it, what does this have to do with me? Shaking her head, Sally was a little disappointed as she prepared to turn around and leave. For a moment, she realized that she actually hoped that Roddy would stand at the entrance of the church and smile at her. But now that she thought about it, that was just her wishful thinking. Bishop Benjamin has agreed to the request for an audience. Adventurer, you may enter. May the gods watch over you. The conversation in the distance reached Sally's ears. The last sentence was one of the doctrines of the Holy Sanctum, which was, God watches everything you do. The young girl did not turn back. She continued to stride forward, unconcerned about the guards and adventurers who were closing in on her. She was even a little distracted. By the way, Lord Priest, I have another request that I hope you can agree to. Tell me about it, adventurer. The middle-aged priest's voice was calm. The clergymen in the Holy Sanctum were gentle and helpful, but Sally felt that the adventurer's voice seemed a little familiar. As you know, I am an adventurer who happened to pass by Hollier City. I have some friendship with Lord Kirk, and he happened to ask me to deliver something a few days ago. It's for Miss Sally. Miss Sally? The middle-aged priest turned his head and looked at Sally, who was walking not far away. He said softly, That's her. If there's anything, just give it to her. The conversation not far away echoed in her ears, but Sally did not immediately turn back. She continued to walk forward, trying to maintain her normal posture, but no one could see that her fingers were trembling slightly. She knew that she must not pretend to be familiar with the other party. In this unfamiliar environment, the slightest flaw could lead to unpredictable consequences. The footsteps behind her approached, and a calm but familiar voice sounded behind her. Miss Sally, please wait. Yes. It's Roddy's voice, no doubt. Although she had confirmed everything in her heart, the girl who had matured took a deep breath, slowly turned around, lowered her eyes and said softly, I am, may I ask who you are? Her gaze followed the words, and her posture was as if the two had met for the first time. Although Roddy was wearing a large cloak, the exquisite and unique leather boots and gloves still made her eyes light up. Sally would never forget the unique characteristics of the Chimera's beast scales. So when her eyes fixed on Roddy's face, there was a moment of absent-mindedness, and she even stuttered slightly. The gray linen cloak covered his body, and the brand-new set of leather armor seemed to instantly separate him from the scout captain who was covered in mud, carrying a horn bow and scimitar in Sally's impression. She thought of Roddy's self-introduction that his face was cursed by witchcraft, but he was actually 37 years old, and immediately realized that the other party's words did not seem to be nonsense. The person in front of her, no matter how she looked at it, should not be a scout in a village, but a powerful adventurer with rich experience. For a long time, the image of Roddy in Sally's heart changed again and again, but she could never see a clear outline of him. Scout captain? Adventurer? Mercenary? Knight? Or a descendant of some noble? What he did was simply unimaginable to ordinary people. He led Sally out of the encirclement, and even the powerful guardian knights under her father could not do this kind of thing. Sally felt that her heart was beating very fast, and she almost could not keep a straight face. The corner of her mouth wanted to curl up, but because of restraining herself, it trembled slightly. She clenched her fingers and stared closely at Roddy's face, as if waiting for him to reveal a familiar smile. However, Roddy's serious face did not change at all, only indifference and rigidity, as if he did not know Sally at all. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Sally." Roddy's eyes seemed to have no focus, as if he was looking at a statue. "Lord Kirk asked me to bring you something, which you left in Fenk's village a few days ago. Since the Lord could not come in person, I could only bring his blessing to you." As he said this, he reached out and took out a cloth bag, bowed, and presented it with both hands respectfully. Sally's eyes were fixed on Roddy's face, and she was a little stunned. After a few seconds, she finally understood Roddy's intention. She slowly reached out and took the cloth bag, thanked him with the proper etiquette of a Rose-Cross believer, and then said in a low voice, "Thank you, brave adventurer." "It's nothing." Roddy turned his face to the side, and his emotionless eyes no longer looked at Sally. In the eyes of the soldiers, this adventurer's behavior was normal. In today's era, delivering letters and running errands seemed to be the main function of these idle adventurers, so his words did not arouse any doubt from the priest. Everything was reasonable, and there was no doubt about it. Roddy did not intend to continue the conversation. After Sally took the bag, he bowed deeply, and then turned around to signal the priest to find Bishop Benjamin, completely ignoring Sally's intention. Just like that, the two of them brushed past each other and had a meeting in a way that Sally could never have imagined. 16 days after their last meeting, Sally realized that she couldn't even say anything unnecessary to the other party. She could only watch as the other party's figure gradually disappeared into the distance. There was an indescribable feeling of grievance and depression in her heart. Her fingers tightened before she remembered that she was holding onto the cloth bag that Roddy had given her. She rummaged through it and slowly took out the soft armor shirt. With a dark blue hue and a soft texture, the Camilla beast scales had a low-profile reflection after being processed, and the hand-sewn marks on it were exquisite and neat. Although Sally did not know how much effort was needed to make such a leather armor, she suddenly had an inexplicable feeling. This shirt must have been personally made by Roddy. A piece of parchment fell from the cloth bag, and Sally bent down to pick it up. When she saw the words on it, she pursed her lips slightly, and tears welled up in her eyes. "You don't even want to say goodbye? Bastard!" "This is indeed the ring of Priest Nilda. Adventurer, may I ask where did you get it from?" Bishop Benjamin looked at the ancient silver ring in his hand, and slowly raised his eyes, and asked Roddy who was in front of him. "In an alley in Cambay district. I was about to go to the mercenary guild, and this ring was at the exit of the sewer." Roddy's expression was still slightly cold. "Because I saw the emblem on the ring at the entrance of the Holy Cathedral, I immediately rushed over." "Thank you, adventurer. But you must understand that the Holy Cathedral will pay any price to get to the bottom of this matter," said Kieran. The old man slightly clasped his hands behind his back, and squinted his eyes, looking at Roddy with a twinkle in his eyes. "In other words, if you are related to this matter in any other way, we will not let you go. Before coming here, I have already considered these questions, Lord Bishop. I am just an adventurer who hopes to exchange these clues for some rewards, and I have nothing to lie to you about." Roddy lowered his head, and showed a submissive and respectful look, without any extra expression. Of course, the Holy Cathedral will punish all evil forces, and will also look after those brave and upright young people. Adventurer, thank you for your clues. This was the way to send the guest off, and Roddy conscientiously stood up to leave. He did not ask what the reward would be, and turned around to leave with the guard. Lord Bishop, thank you very much for your contribution to the monastery. Not long after, another guard came over with a small wooden box and handed it to Roddy with both hands. Roddy received the box with both hands and did not look at what was inside. He then left the monastery without even looking at it. Along the way, Roddy did not see Sally at all. To him, this seemed to mean that Sally already understood her current situation and their current relationship. Presumably, she was quite intelligent and wouldn't do anything stupid. Hopefully, she could grow up as soon as possible before the internal division of the Holy Cathedral. Roddy silently sighed in his heart. He came here today because he finally found out that Sally was in the Rose Cross Holy Cathedral. For ordinary people, this was not a place that they could casually enter, but Roddy knew how to enter openly. That ring was the key. The fall of Priest Nilda was one of the famous long quest chains in Roddy's memory, and the beginning of the quest chain was the ring near the sewer. Of course, only Roddy knew the location of the ring, and ordinary people would not be able to find it. Fortunately, this quest chain existed 2 years ago, and Roddy chose to activate this quest chain to achieve his goal of entering the monastery. Now that he was lucky enough to meet Sally, it saved him some trouble. Chapter 50. Roddy did not notice the gaze behind him. When he walked out of the monastery, he immediately cleared his mind of all thoughts of Sally. He was like an emotionless machine. After a few minutes, all that was left in his mind was planning his future career. He habitually glanced at the mission panel. The Fall of the Priestess of Nilda mission chain had been activated. The content was, try to find clues at the place where you picked up the ring. Roddy closed it. He did not intend to continue with the mission. The mission chain had a huge gap in level. The requirement to activate it was only level 1, but to complete the third step, one had to be at least level 10. The seventh step required a team of 10 people at level 20. The last step could only be completed by players who had advanced to their profession level 30. Although the rewards were bountiful enough to raise his reputation in the Rose Cross Cathedral to reverence, it was only useful for priests. So, he did not want to do this kind of mission with no rewards at all. He looked at his character status. Because the final level of the mission was very high, the activation of the mission chain rewarded him with a lot of experience points. Even the starting step, which had the lowest reward, still gave Roddy 4,000 experience points. Including the mission of Save the Daughter of Duke, Sally, Roddy realized that he had the qualifications to directly jump 2 levels. He did not hesitate and directly selected the Level Up button, leveling up to level 5. He saved the experience points for leveling up to level 6 as insurance. He then took out the box that Bishop Benjamin gave him and opened it. There was a very simple necklace in the box. The pendant was the symbol of the Rose Cross Church, the Holy Triangle. Exquisite Holy Triangle pendant, excellent necklace location, neck +2 strength equipment, Rose Cross Cathedral. Reputation value increased to friendly. God's eyes are always on the people. A necklace was better than nothing. Roddy thought for a moment and replaced the mysterious necklace. The attributes were secondary. The Rose Cross Cathedral's reputation value increased to friendly was a pleasant surprise for Roddy. The resources of the Rose Cross Cathedral were abundant, but they were usually not sold to the public. Only those with a reputation value of friendly and above could buy some affordable and high-quality goods from this religious force's armory. Roddy happened to need to change his armory, so this necklace was a better choice. Farron's Armory. This way. Roddy raised his head to confirm the direction. He then walked towards the place where the equipment was sold in the Holy Temple. However, just as he was about to close the equipment slot, he suddenly saw the ring on his finger that he found in the Chimera's beast cave. Because he had leveled up to level 5, the attributes of the ring had been activated. But now that Roddy's attributes had skyrocketed because of the Stalker set, the attributes of the ring were not enough anymore. But he still instinctively glanced at the mission notification that was activated because he had reached the level. You gently wipe the ring and find a line of light gold text on it. Hlukji, smear. Such a simple sentence made Roddy raise his eyebrows. As a technological geek, he was not only proficient in the human language of Brina, but he also dabbled in other languages. This background knowledge was the key to mastering a game, especially when faced with a mission. And now, it was obviously time for Roddy to put this knowledge to use. Roddy could not identify the meaning of this line of writing, but he could tell that it was the language of the elves. But the elves were divided into wood elves, dark elves, high elves, and so on. He could only tell from the spelling that this was the spelling of the wood elves, and the meaning of one of the words was light. Light? The wood elves worshipped a half-human, half-deer primordial deity. In a sense, it was somewhat related to the Druid sect. The wood elves were not a large group, and clergy and spellcasters were relatively rare. But there was a type of priest that seemed to be related to light. It was a class that players could not choose, Guardian of Light. Roddy had only heard of this class. It seemed that the function of this class was to fight against demons and the undead or something. It sounded similar to the Holy Knights in human religion, but it existed much earlier. Later on, it almost disappeared, leaving only a few NPCs in the world, and it was still rarely seen. Heh. Seems like the elves and the undead have a grudge against each other. Roddy sighed, but he also felt that there was something wrong with this ring. Logically speaking, any mission should have a verbal notification on the mission content. For example, the fall of the priest of Nilda would indicate a location to continue searching for clues. But this ring did not have such a description at all. Roddy thought for a moment, looked around, and walked into an empty alley. He raised his fist and pointed the ring forward and said, Hlukji, smear. Nothing happened. Looks like it's not a magic item. Roddy mumbled to himself, put down his hand, and was about to leave. But after a few steps, he felt that something was wrong, because there seemed to be some faint changes in the reflection of the walls on both sides. The highly vigilant Roddy thought for a moment, then slowly raised his palm, shook it a few times, and finally understood what the problem was. It turned out that the ring was glowing. Because of the strong sunlight at the moment, Roddy did not notice any changes in it before, until he walked into the dark. Only then did he see the difference of this ring. Ring of light? What is this? Shaking the flashlight in his hand, Roddy helplessly chanted the elven language on the ring again, and the light disappeared. He was a little confused about the function of this ring, but he had no clue at the moment, so he walked out of the alley while thinking, and headed for the Farron's munitions warehouse. Roddy planned to leave this main city after buying enough military supplies, because the orcs at the border were still his main source of experience. After obtaining new equipment and weapons, and a higher level, Roddy would definitely let those orc bastards understand what a real harassment tactic was. April 588 of the Elon calendar could be considered a turning point in the history of the Kingdom of Karen. Francis' operation to kill Sally ended in failure this month. His original overall plan was completely disrupted. The impact of this not only made the Earl feel frustrated, but in a sense, it also made the witch doctor, Sorota, who was secretly in contact with him, very depressed. Looking from Norland Village, a village at the edge of the kingdom, to the northwest, after flying over the endless grassland and crossing hundreds of kilometers, when the tents springing up like bamboo shoots after a rain appeared in his vision, he would be considered to have entered the territory of the Orc Kingdom. Herds of sheep and cows roamed the meadow. Occasionally, the herding orcs would sing rough songs. Because they were poor, most of them wore simple clothes made of animal skin. Their skin was rough, and their faces were sad. This was the portrayal of the entire orc kingdom. The nomadic people were actually not completely poor. If all their cattle and sheep were exchanged for the gold coins of the human kingdom, perhaps every herdsman would live a much better life than the farmers in the kingdom of Karen. But the reality was cruel. The hostility with the human kingdom and the isolation with the Tasman undead in the south left these herdsmen with no place to exchange. It was like guarding a mountain of gold and silver but having nowhere to spend it. The high-priced cattle and sheep could only be kept for themselves for the winter. In a kingdom composed of 90% grassland and 10% desert, the living conditions were much more difficult than in the kingdom of Karen. The ruling structure was loose. The kingdom was composed of tribes ruled by a dozen chieftains. There was no unity to speak of. Among these tribes, the Hammer of Rohal could be considered as a tribe in the middle of the whole orc kingdom. At this time, in a village of the Hammer of Rohal, there were some groans of pain coming from a huge tent. There was blue and white smoke in the air, and a strange medicinal fragrance could be smelled at the tip of the nose. The injured orc was lying on a bed covered with animal skin, gritting his teeth to endure the pain. But after all, there was no anesthetic in this era, and there were times when he could not endure it. The orc's body was as strong as a bear's, and he could even be said to be one of the few big guys in the clan. However, his usually majestic appearance was now abnormally dispirited. Bean-sized beads of sweat were dripping from his forehead, and his green face was twisted because of the pain. A slanted wound across his back was exposed in the air, so deep that the bone could be seen. It seemed that he had been delayed for too long, and the wound was covered with festering pus. But now, most of the rotten flesh had been cleaned with a knife, applied with herbs, and then tightened with bandages. Coarse hemp bandages were considered precious items in the orc kingdom. It was obvious that he was highly valued at this time. "That's enough, Kozar." A faint voice sounded beside him, calm and powerful. The orc named Kozar immediately got up and knelt on the ground, ignoring the pain. He said in a low voice, "Thank you, Lord Sirota. Kozar swears to follow in your footsteps until death." Such words were somewhat flattering or pretentious in the human kingdom, but they carried a heavy weight among the orcs. Sirota, who was the tribe's chief witch doctor, reached out his hand and pulled him up, letting him sit on a wooden chair at the side. Sirota still used that calm tone to ask, then, "Kosa, tell me in detail what you encountered." "Yes, Lord Sirota, The orc exhaled, and then began to narrate his experience in a low voice. Kozar, who had been slashed on his back, had only returned to the village yesterday. He had fainted at the entrance of the village. The wound on his body was seriously festering, and he was almost half dead. This orc, who had spent nearly a month crossing the prairie and finally returned to the village on foot, ate almost everything that could be eaten along the way: weeds, wild rabbits, dead rat. In short, he had crossed hundreds of kilometers of prairie on foot, just to tell the witch doctor a bad news. The intention of building an outpost in the kingdom of Karen had been discovered by the humans. And the outpost where Kozar was located had suffered unprecedented damage. Combined with the news that the raiding troop had lost 10 wolf riders some time ago, this witch doctor, who had a high position in the Hammer of Rohal, slightly clenched the bone die in his hand after listening to Kozar's report. He narrowed his eyes and sighed as if he was talking to himself. Chapter 51. Early May, Norland Village. After Sodeler saw the battlefield where Rhodey killed the wolf cavalry, he went to Norland Village and waited for the captain who had disappeared to return. His appearance surprised Rouge, Carter, and the others, but Sodeler only said that he had something to discuss with Roddy, so they didn't say anything and let him wait. The original second lieutenant Sodden, after seeing Rouge and the others return a few days ago, foolishly ordered them to kill more orcs to earn merit points. It was as if in his eyes, these scouts killing orcs were as natural as farmers harvesting wheat. Naturally, the result of this stupid order was that he was beaten up by Rouge and the other scouts. Once the subordinates grew arrogant, the incompetent superior would always be the first to suffer. Sodeler was startled by the tragic scene of the siege. After all, Sodden's position was about the same as his. He couldn't imagine being beaten up by his subordinates, but he couldn't stop them. In the end, he could only drag the unconscious second lieutenant Sodden to a shady place and bandage him up. That was the best he could do. Then, he discovered that Sodden had been beaten silly. He didn't know whether it was lucky or not. After waking up, Sodden basically didn't know how to do anything other than smile foolishly at people, eat, and sleep. At this stage, Rouge, Carter, and the others naturally acted as if this matter had nothing to do with them. Sodeler did not say anything else and used his own money to treat these scouts to a good meal. He raised his wine glass and drank to his heart's content with everyone. Finally, he addressed these scouts as his brothers and expressed that he had not seen anything. Thus, Sodeler, who had been drifting away from the group, gradually integrated into the small circle of Norland village. After drinking too much, the soldiers naturally had to compete with each other. When Rouge, who had the best swordsmanship, was easily defeated by the other party, they gradually realized that this unknown second lieutenant seemed to be not a simple character. Rouge and Carter admired each other's swordsmanship, and Sodeler was a meticulous person. The days passed quickly, and on the 7th of May, year 588 of the Elon calendar, Sodeler finally found the person he was waiting for. Roddy appeared at the entrance of Norland village in the evening. Under the setting sun, when Roddy walked into the village wearing leather armor and a black cloak, the villagers who wanted to greet him hesitated and did not dare to speak. The sharp look of the stalker suit was unusually fierce, and it made Roddy look completely different from his original little scout temperament. The 6-pack horses behind him were filled with goods, which made people think that he was a rich and powerful traveling merchant. Roddy didn't care about this. He just put on his hood and pulled his horse to the canteen of the scout team. Then, he walked in casually. Let me tell you, if I hadn't dodged in time, that bastard would have smashed my head open. Carter! Stop bragging. Look at you. Even if the beast man is 10 meters away from you, you still say that he can almost hit you. Can't you give me some face? I'm not done yet. My equipment wasn't good, my sword was bent, and my leather armor was broken. If the beast man touched me, I would have died. Of course I had to hide further away, right? At this time, the scouts in the canteen were drinking and chatting loudly. Carter, who was bragging about how he killed the beast man, raised his mug of ale and gestured. But when his gaze swept towards the door, he froze as if he had been electrocuted. His eyebrows furrowed together, he raised the mug in his hand and pointed it forward. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Sensing that something was wrong, the scouts stopped what they were doing and turned around in unison. Then, they revealed a shocked expression, as if they had seen an alien. "TSK, TSK, TSK. I haven't seen you in a few days, and no one recognizes me?" Roddy pulled back his hood and chuckled. Without waiting for his comrades to respond, he said in a commanding tone, "Let's not waste time. Let me announce something." *slap. Almost instantly, all the scouts stood up. The crisp sound of their boots hitting each other echoed in the canteen. Sodeler, who was still sitting at the side, was dumbfounded. After staying in Norland village for so long, these scouts seemed to be no different from his subordinates in Fink's village, except for the occasional arrogance. However, after Roddy appeared for a few seconds, He realized that these solemn scouts had suddenly become so strange. They were absolutely disciplined, obedient, and respectful. This was something Sodeler had never seen before. Ahem, no need to be so serious. In order to make it easier for you to kill the beastmen, and to protect ourselves, I've bought a new batch of equipment for you. Asterisk clang. Asterisk Roddy threw the heavy bag in his hand on the ground and opened it, revealing a dozen long swords in sheath. Everyone has one. Roddy's words were like a heavy hammer, making the soldiers feel like they were suffocating. To the others, his words were undoubtedly nonsense. The captain is buying equipment for the soldiers? Has he eaten too much? Even if the scouts thought with their knees, they would still understand. How could someone who was neither a noble lord nor a wealthy merchant afford so much money? Even the cheapest swords and armor were not something ordinary people could afford. How could Roddy, who was only paid by the army, buy these things? Sodeler's eyes widened as he looked at the bags. He swallowed hard, and even the thought of greeting Roddy was thrown to the back of his mind. Ruger raised his eyebrows and took out a longsword from the bag. He looked at the sharp blade under the candlelight and was speechless for a moment. Roddy, did you loot Fort Concetin? He could tell at a glance that the equipment was definitely of high quality. The craftsmanship was comparable to that of the soldiers in Fort Concetin, or even better. Don't ask nonsense. Everyone has one, and there are many more outside. Everyone, try them. I'll kick the ass of anyone who tries to rob it. Roddy did not answer Lu Ji's question. Instead, he looked at the soldiers in front of him and shouted loudly. His words were immediately answered. The soldiers were extremely excited. They rushed forward to take the equipment and then rushed out of the house with a strange cry. In the end, only Ruger, Carter, and Sodeler did not move. Don't be nervous. The things came from an open and above-board place, except for Sodden's. By the way, where did Sodden go? That. Ahem, I'll explain to you later, Captain. Second Lieutenant Sodeler has been waiting for many days. Do you want to talk to him first? The atmosphere was relaxed, and Carter was not as serious as before. He winked at Ruger and walked out of the house with the latter. Sodeler was left behind with a complicated expression. Looking at this second lieutenant, Roddy seemed to speak naturally. I'm surprised you're here. He untied his cloak, revealing his conspicuous black leather armor. His tone did not hide his surprise. To be honest, facing this Legion commander in his memory, he was actually feeling a little conflicted. It was just a chance encounter in Feng's village, but it was obviously not a coincidence to meet him here. Roddy's mind was racing as he tried to figure out why Sodeler would appear here, but he could not figure out what the problem was. Sodeler thought for a moment, and finally decided not to beat around the bush. He said that, to tell you the truth, I saw the scene of your battle with the orcs, the corpses of 10 wolf riders, and your amazing archery skills. Ruger and the others have already proved that you do have such skills. So? Roddy narrowed his eyes. He immediately began to deduce what Sodeler knew. Sodeler had seen the battlefield, so he might have indirectly deduced that he was trying to save Sally. Then, according to the rules, anyone who knew about this must be killed. But now, standing in front of him was the Legion commander in his memory, Sodeler. One thing Roddy knew was that this powerful general who fought against the corrupt nobles of the kingdom hated traitors like Francis the most. And the one who ordered Francis to be hanged was this young second lieutenant in front of him. Thinking about it this way, it seemed that Sodeler did not have any formal conflict with him. So, I think I roughly understand what happened to the Lucifron family. Sodeler, who was a head taller than Roddy, looked at him, and his tone became quite respectful. I admire your choice. You were able to stand up at this time and really stop things from happening. This is something I wanted to do but could not do. I think Miss Sally should be fine, right? The means of communication in this era were not developed. At this time, no one in Norland Village knew that Sally had become a priest candidate. But because of this, Roddy had a more intuitive understanding of Soddler's meticulousness. This guy was really a freaking monster. He should just change his name to Sherlock Holmes. Concealing the shock in his heart, Roddy exhaled and said, "Miss Sally will naturally be fine, but what I want to know is, why are you here? Even if Fank's village disappears, I'm afraid your position will not have anything to do with Norland Village." Hearing this, Soddler showed a hesitant expression and finally said, "You can kill so many orcs and ensure Miss Sally's safety. I think perhaps even the strongest knight under the lords at the border is not as strong as you. So, the purpose of my coming here is actually to learn." Learn? Roddy raised his eyebrows. All the answers he had originally thought of were completely disrupted by Soddler's words. At this moment, his mind was really confused. This strong man who had broken through level 60 in his memory ran in front of him and said that he wanted to learn from him? Did he take the wrong medicine, or am I still asleep? But Roddy's thoughts quickly changed. Although Soddler was now stronger than the scouts, he was after all only a very low-level second lieutenant. As for his strength, it was not that strong at all. He was afraid that even if he encountered 2 orcs, he would not be able to deal with them. But what about himself? After equipping a full set of level 4 top-tier purple equipment, his attributes would increase by several fold. He would practically be invincible in Cullen Novice Village and Orc Village. He would be like a bug in the game amongst those of the same level. In short, he would be awesome. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.